everybody. My name is Dave Jackson, and you're listening to Tales from the Backlog. This is a video games deep dive review podcast where each week I'm joined by a guest to bring a game out of the backlog, play it, and discuss. My guest today is a friend of the show, a Tales from the Backlog community member, and shepherd of the Ape Men. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Thanks. Those ape men just need a nice guiding hand.
Yes.
It's for their own good.
We appreciate all the work that you do. Yeah. Well, it's great to have you on the show after, so many years at this point talking about games in Discord servers and Slack channels and all kinds of stuff. So it's great to have you on. I think we have a fun game today.
Yeah. Really like this game, and I've been listening to the show for a long time, so it's pretty fun to get a chance to come on and talk about something I've really enjoyed this year. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Today, we're going to talk about Nine Souls, which is an action Metroidvania developed and published by Red Candle Games for PC, PS5, and Xbox in 2024. Real quick, creative director and producer credit is to Vincent Yang for Nine Souls here today. If this is your first time listening to the show, thank you for stopping by. Here's how spoilers work on the podcast. We are not going to spoil the story for a while. We're also not going to talk too much shop about specific boss fights, as we tend to like to discuss in these tough action games. So we're going to save all that stuff for the spoilers section. You can check down in the show notes for when spoilers begin. Until that point, you are safe. And also, on the podcast, I've covered Red Candle Games' other two games. I covered Detention in a Patreon-only bonus episode, and I covered Devotion in episode 139 with Jill Grote from the Indie Informer. So those are other things in the catalog. If you came to the show new and you love Red Candle, I think safe to say both of us love Red Candle, so people may want to go check out those past episodes. So what is Nine Souls? If you don't know what this game is, we have some elevator pitches for you. I take the easy elevator pitch. It is the host's privilege. I say Nine Souls is Sekiro meets Hollow Knight. Josh, what would you say?
Yeah, so I've got a Metroidvania with demanding combat in a setting that's galaxy-spanning sci-fi by way of ancient China.
There we go. There's a lot going on in here, and we'll talk about that really interesting setting a little bit later on, but galaxy spanning sci-fi by way of ancient China is it's a strong hook, and it makes this game pretty unique, even in a really crowded Metroidvania genre.
Yeah, definitely. I think it stands out in the genre just for like how intricate like the world building is.
Mm-hmm. So I played this on PC. It took me 27 hours to beat. I banged my head against the standard difficulty, and we'll talk about difficulty later, but 27 hours to beat on that standard difficulty. Where did you play this? How long did the playthrough take you?
So I also played it on PC. I think my first playthrough came in at like 35 hours or something like that. Mm-hmm. But then I replayed it again when I knew that we were going to be doing the show on it. And that second playthrough only took me like 25 hours. So that's like a full 10 hours faster.
Yeah.
And pretty much like all that time was spent like learning bosses. So
yeah, for sure. I think of that 27 hours, I can easily point to 5 hours of that is just trying the same 2 or 3 bosses. So I can definitely believe that replaying it will really shave some time off.
Right. Yeah. It went so much smoother the second time through it. It's really kind of amazing. Like how, like once you get it, like you have it and you can like knock stuff out that seemed like almost impossible the first time you ran into it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, 100%. So we always start the show out by talking about our histories with the game and with the developer here. Red Candle Games kind of made them a name for themselves with these kind of like small scope, but like big idea, high concept horror games. And this is a really different one. So before playing Nine Souls, had you played Detention and or Devotion? And what was it that drew you to play Nine Souls? Because I knew you played this like right when it came out, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I'd been aware of Red Candle for a while. They made Detention and Devotion, which were really solid indie horror games. Detention was like pretty basic in terms of production values, but it was really interesting, and the sort of setting, the way it was, had that cultural specificity, with being set in a particular period in the 70s in Taiwan. And the Detention kind of took that to the next level with, even better production values, but it still was super specific in, the way that it was like showing a world that really seemed based in a particular time and place.
Mm-hmm.
So I really thought that, I mean, the horror genre, that kind of indie horror space, I played a lot of games in it. It's pretty crowded, but I thought like, what Red Candle had done, like it really stood out. And I thought it was kind of a bummer that the one thing that most people knew about the studio was, the kind of like Steam, like getting delisted type of stuff. So
Yeah, right.
but yeah, then when I saw that, they were making like a Metroidvania kind of like Souls-like type of thing, it was like, wow, that is a really weird departure. And I wasn't sure if I was super happy about the direction that they were going.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a little trepidatious going into it, but they really delivered like an excellent game. So it was all for the best.
Yeah, for sure. I was kind of like not disappointed that they were going in a Metroidvania direction, because I love Metroidvanias, but the basing the combat around Sekiro was kind of gave me pause. Like I probably wasn't as excited to play Nine Souls as I should have been. And like I really liked Sekiro, but Sekiro's really fucking hard, and I just like wasn't sure that I wanted to play another one,
Yeah.
Like I want to replay Sekiro, but it's a very easy one to just keep pushing down the line and be like, I'm not really feeling that right now.
Yeah.
I don't want to fight Sword Saint Ishin quite yet. So I also like, on the strength of their previous games, I had a feeling this was going to be good. But I just kind of like kicked it down a little bit, in like not that long. As we're recording this, it came out maybe 6 months ago. So like it wasn't that long ago, but I did that episode about devotion, and Jill, the guest on that episode, was really talking up Nine Souls in that podcast. And so had you, and so had some others in our Discord server. So I figured like, maybe it is time to move it back up the list. Like these people clearly know how to make really good games, and a Metroidvania, that's my shit. So I was excited to get into it once it got pushed back up there. And to do our like quick top level thoughts here, there's no discussion about this game that can be had without talking about how hard it is. And I had a really hard time at the beginning of it, and the final boss is a real asshole of a final boss. It's very difficult. So like it's interesting. There was like a U, or like a like a W shaped difficulty curve in here.
Yeah,
where,
it's the bathtub curve where it's like steep like at the beginning and the end. Yeah.
The bathtub curve. I like that. Yeah. So like at the beginning, when I felt like I should be being eased into it, I had a really hard time, and I was streaming the first couple hours of it, and I got like real mad during a boss fight on that stream. But what that initial difficulty was actually doing was teaching me how to play the game. So like the middle part of the game, there were challenges, but I always felt like I knew what I should do. I just had to execute on it. So other than those sides of the bathtub, as you said, I found this to be like a really, really fun challenge. And honestly, the final boss I thought was a fun challenge. It's just very hard. Mm-hmm. So I really, really liked this game once I got over that initial, punch in the face of difficulty that this game gave to me. And as a little bonus to it, other than gameplay things, I really enjoyed the story and the kind of the story themes that are present in this game, which shouldn't be a surprise because of Red Candle's history. Their other games are like this too. It's just when I play a Metroidvania, I'm not often expecting, compelling story, because I don't think there is any Metroid or Castlevania story that I've ever been compelled by. So I don't come to this genre necessarily being expecting to be compelled by the story, but I really like the story here too. So this rounded into just a really, really good game.
Hmm. Yeah, and it a lot of games like I just played that Prince of Persia Metroidvania game like
Right.
a month ago or so, and it was kind of interesting to compare it to Nine Souls. Because that game has a story and it's not like bad or anything, but the story drops out for so long, and you can just kind of forget about it and be like,
Hmm.
oh, this game is about like jumping over spikes and like exploring the sewers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Nine Souls, like it never like even as you're like going through like the various areas, you're always finding like lore pickups and you'll get like flashbacks and just kind of weird sequences that it goes in. So like you never kind of lose that narrative thread while you're
Right.
playing it. Um, yeah, so it's sort of like it keeps you engaged with the story that it's telling the whole time, and it doesn't just kind of devolve into pure mechanics kind of thing.
Right. So let's put a pin in these various talking points, as we always do. We'll listen to a bit of music, and when we come back, we'll set up what the story in Nine Souls is about. Nine Souls is set in a futuristic Taopunk world, as it is described by Red Candle, mixing Taoism and cyberpunk, sci-fi, and Eastern mythology. The thematic content and the backstory in Nine Souls deal really heavily with the relationship between the two when we talk about science versus faith, or progress versus nature and things like that, and opposing viewpoints and different ideologies of groups of people and characters throughout the game. So that's something that we will be talking about in the spoiler section, how those play out throughout the game. But in Nine Souls, you play as a little cat-like dude named E. That's how I'm going to pronounce it. I don't know if it's E or Yi, but I'm going to go with E. E is a member of a cat-like race called the Solarians, who lives amongst humans in the beginning of the game. And in the human village, E has a friend, a little boy named Shan Shan. And today it's Shan Shan's turn to take part in this religious ritual. And this is kind of the inciting event in the story. And this opening is really cool because like they set you up in this beautiful, colorful village, and there's these like ritual artifacts around the town, and these huts and stuff like that. And then you go to this really high-tech ritual device, and the person in front of Shan Shan steps in it, and it kind of picks them up and just like twists and pops their head off, like real gruesome like. And it's real striking.
Yeah, this game, it gets right into it with like setting up the world and the story and stuff. Because if you don't know like what you're getting yourself into with the story that's being told here, like at first you're like, okay, I'm this little cat guy and I'm like hanging out in a cave. And then like 30 seconds later, okay, I'm running around in this kind of ancient Chinese village, and there's all these villagers running around with cat masks on, and they seem to be like venerating me as some kind of god. And then like 3 minutes after that, your little friend buddy is getting his head popped off, and then you're jumping down into this kind of like sci-fi, futuristic base type of thing, and it's not giving you any context for why this stuff is happening.
Right. That's another thing too. It presents things in a way that's easy to understand. The person in front of Shan Shan in the ritual gets their head twisted off. Then Shan Shan steps into the machine for his turn, and E jumps out, intervenes, grabs Shan Shan, and it sets off an alarm. And then you fall down into this high-tech facility where you see this kind of human world that the game started in is just one section of this facility. So what's going on? And this is like 5 minutes of the opening of the game. This isn't like, spoiling big things that you're not going to maybe even see in a trailer or something.
Yeah, this is like the intro kind of thing. So
Yeah. So what's actually happening in the game is this facility is governed by a council of leaders. They're known as the souls, 9 souls. So E sets out on a mission, and it quickly becomes clear that he's on a mission for revenge to take down the 9 souls, take what's called the soul seals, which are it's almost like a pass key that each of them carries that will grant him access to this, like full access to this station. So what's interesting, and you mentioned this already, Josh, is the story setup for this is not given to you right away why E is on this path for revenge. It's not because of what happens with that ritual, with the heads being twisted off. E already knew all of this stuff. You don't know why E is on this path for revenge for a while. And it's one of the things that's revealed as you play through the game.
yeah, it really starts like right in the middle of the story, and yeah, it is interesting because he's doing a lot of like talking to various people. He's got his little like AI companion who that's giving you some context. Just seeing his conversation with them, you see his conversations with Xuan where he's like explaining kind of like what he can to this little boy, and you're kind of picking up the context, but it's starting, but it's the player's only very slowly getting filled in on what it is, and you might think that it's one of those games where this is all just kind of nonsense, and like maybe it never really comes together, and it's just kind of like impressionistic or something like that, and they're not going to get real specific about explaining like what's going on. But that's not the case. This, like,
Yeah.
you're going to learn everything about like what's going on. Like the story is going to like span like thousands of years, but it's going to be fully explained. I mean, to the extent that it can.
Yeah. And it also kind of depends on your willingness to read, like a lot. One of the big types of collectibles in the game, rewards for exploring, is these kind of log entries, or you'll find like these artifacts that have text descriptions and stuff. And a lot of the like really key background story stuff is in those things. So it will depend on your willingness to read those, which, for me, I don't always read that stuff, but in 9 Souls, those things are spaced out enough that I never felt like my gameplay was being interrupted too often to like stop and read a couple paragraphs. Those are, you pick them up as rewards for doing a little puzzle or exploring or something like that. So maybe a couple times an hour, you'll find one of those. So I enjoyed reading that stuff, and I enjoyed the characters that you meet along the way too, like your kind of group of people that gathers back at the home base.
Yeah, this game has really great characters as you kind of build up. You've got kind of like a hub area, like in a lot of games that you'll kind of like fill up with people as you meet them out in the world and
Yeah.
bring them back, and you'll get items to decorate it and all that kind of stuff. And I really like all those characters. Like you've got Kwafu, who kind of looks like Garfield, and you've got
Yeah.
Xuan who is just going to make like a huge variety of stuff to decorate the place. And you've got the weird merchant guy, and you get a real like collection of misfits in that place. But I think they're all super interesting.
Yeah, and they all represent like different parts of this world. As much as the station setting will allow, you're not going to get like representatives from all parts of the galaxy or something. This isn't Mass Effect, but you will get like different types of people. There's a couple of humans, there's a couple of natives, but they don't look like E. There's a good mix. I really like Shenong, the guy who eats the poisons.
That guy's great. He's like the MVP
very funny
in this game.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
But like having Shan in the hub is great too, because he's very much one of those characters that's like, I'm not answering questions. I don't need to explain myself. I'm on this mission. I will not explain past just the bare bones of like what I'm going to do next. And Shan is there as this like inquisitive bright little kid, and he's there to kind of chip away at that. And so we have this developing relationship and character development of a lot of these characters too, which like we have interesting characters, they're fun to talk to, but there's development in the characters as well, which is, a nice little cherry on top when we're talking about, especially a Metroidvania story. Like a lot of times you're just picking up merchants to populate your hub in this type of game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other thing, I wish I could go deeper on this, but I just don't know enough about it. But, just from the little bit of reading around that I've done in this game, pretty much all these characters, including Yi, including Xuan Xuan, including Shen Nong, they're pretty much all drawn from either Chinese history or like Chinese mythology.
Mm-hmm.
So like Shen Nong is a character that he like, I was just reading the Wikipedia page for him before this recording, and he's pretty much like his character design is drawn from like real portraits of this guy that was like, I guess they're not really sure if he was like real or if he was mythological, but
Mm-hmm.
he was a Chinese emperor, and he basically invented Chinese medicine, and he did it by basically testing it on himself, which is pretty much like what happens in the game.
Right. Yeah.
And even the portrait that I found of him, like shows him, like basically chewing on herbs, which is like what he looks like in the game and stuff like that. So I think if like, for people who know this kind of history and this culture, better than I do, and probably better than you do, I'm guessing, like,
oh yeah,
you'll probably, be like, you'll be doing what is it, like the pointing at the TV?
Yeah, the
thing,
Leonardo
right?
DiCaprio.
Yeah, exactly. You've been doing that. Hey, it's that guy kind of thing. But for me, it was more like, oh, this guy's really interesting and weird. Like, how did they come up with that? And then you read about it later, and you're like, oh, this is like a real guy. So I really enjoyed that part of it.
I picked up on a lot of that too. And I think part of it is the like localization and spelling of the names out in English doesn't always match up with like their historical counterparts. So it may like throw people off the trail a little bit. Not to say that's what threw me off the trail. I don't know anything about Chinese history. So
right,
like that's, but it was interesting to go on the Nine Souls Wikipedia page and see character names with like blue links to figures from Chinese history. And so we have like those kind of parallels as well. There are some cool themes that the game works through throughout the story. I already mentioned Taoism, which we'll talk about in the spoiler section, but Taoism represents a connection to like this mythical force coming from nature, and it kind of represents the foil in this game to science and technological progress, and doing things that are unnatural in the name of advancement and things like that. So there's like a bit of a transhumanist theme on the science side. There's always progress being made. There's parallels to real world history and technological progress, but there's a lot of themes in addition to those things as well. Were there any that stuck out to you as just really interesting?
I mean, I think the core of it is tied in with Yi's personal like saga and like his character development, which is this pull between kind of trying to control the world with technology or with like military force and that kind of stuff versus this sort of idea of non-action, right? Which is kind of like, a pillar of Taoism. So, I think you'll see the character be pulled between those two poles. You'll read about the history of the world through these lore notes and stuff being pulled between these two poles, and the cycles that where the world kind of vacillates between those two poles. And I think that's really the core of the thematic content of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also, this is a revenge tale. So anytime you have a good story that's built around a revenge tale, there's some content about, the nature of a quest like that. There is, like you said, a point where non-action might be the best course of action, for lack of a better word. Now that I'm talking and not thinking, there's there's a lot going on in the story, and so there's a lot of thematic content, but I also want to, just give a quick shout out to like the plot of Nine Souls and like what you learn about E's history and these other characters that he's intertwined with, these other souls, and all of that, I thought that was really fun too. Like there's a story in here about, you know, the fall of a civilization and a plan to, you know, preserve it in the face of this overwhelming destructive force, we'll say, and how these other characters and their own ideologies like chose to work within that. And so like when you lay out the plot too, I think that was really fun to uncover. And then it's not all archaeology like in a Dark Souls or something like that. There is a present day plot and, you know, ways that E's actions affect people and things around him too. It's so like this was the big surprise for me. I wasn't surprised that the gameplay was fun or that the game looked great or sounded awesome. The surprise was there's so much interesting story stuff in this game too.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, like I would that surprised me as well, but you know, it really shouldn't if
No, it
you
shouldn't.
know, based on Red Candle's history, right? Like just because they're working in a different sort of genre,
Yeah.
you know, they were still able to draw on those like narrative strengths. You know, that they'd shown off in their previous games, and that stuff's fully present here. You know, it's something that I wanted to kind of say about this game is that, you know, I think to the extent that it has a reputation and kind of the circles that, you know, we're a part of, it's all about how hard the game is.
Yeah.
And I just, you know, if there's one thing that I want people to know about the game, it's that there's all this other stuff here. And yeah, it is a hard game, but that's only one aspect of the game. And there's a lot more here to enjoy besides that.
Right. So is often the case with difficult games, especially within, you know, discourse about Souls-like games in particular out there. The conversation that rises to the top is always conversation about difficulty. And I've you know been beating this drum when talking about From Software's games, where like I like the game, I like playing the games, I like the gameplay, and I like overcoming a challenge, but that's not really why I'm there, and that's not what's most impressive about those games. And Nine Souls is kind of like that too. And like we'll talk about the gameplay here in a bit, but I definitely want to back you up on that like there is a lot more going on in Nine Souls than just hardcore gamer, you know, difficulty hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So let's take this opportunity. You mentioned something that I want to tease for the other side of this music break. You mentioned something about Red Candle's history, and I want to transition that into talking about the way this game looks and sounds. So, little music, we will come back and we'll talk about that. You had mentioned not being surprised that the story was good or that there was, you know, depth to it because of Red Candle's history. Red Candle's known for making horror games, and Nine Souls is not a horror game, but there's a lot that goes into the way this game looks and sounds that you can see kind of that DNA from Red Candle coming back up to the surface. So for most of the game, you're going to see this vibrant, super colorful, like hand-drawn art style. It is a gorgeous looking game, but don't let that trick you into thinking that Red Candle forgot where they came from. I guess we'll say that. There's a lot to this game visually too, and like what you see at the beginning of the game doesn't mean they don't have tricks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a few sections of the game specifically where they're sort of like busting out their old horror game tools
Yeah.
to bring to the effort. But yeah, like even aside from that, just when you're going through areas where they're not really trying to do a horror type of thing, you'll get just like weird stuff. Like when you're going through the kind of farming area, you know, you're not just seeing farming stuff. You're seeing like there'll be something in the background that's like it's ears of corn, but instead of a corn cob in there, there's fish in there for some reason.
Mm.
And you'll be going through the kind of initial areas and seeing these weird kind of like schematics in the background that kind of look like you know how when you see like Chinese medicine stuff, you'll see those kind of like schematic in the body of how like, you know, different kind of
Yeah.
pressure points are connected to different organs and stuff. You'll just see that kind of stuff in the background. And then combined with the music, it all leads to, you know, even in areas that are more just kind of like focused on, you know, the action and stuff, there's a lot of really creepy imagery that
Yeah.
it'll be showing you like all the time.
A lot of stuff in the background for sure. Like I'm thinking of, you know, that hallway that you drop down in at right after that ritual at the beginning of the game. I mean, you saw someone's head get twisted off, and then you drop down in this hallway, and there's this like, you know, these tubes, and there's just brains flowing down these tubes down the
Yeah, and you'll
hallways.
see like body bags with the chunks of the villagers that are being like harvested.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, going by in the background, and it's just really like, you know, bizarre stuff like that.
Yeah. And that stuff is not presented as horror. Like it's drawn very much in line with like that colorful art style of the rest of the game. It's not there to scare you, but it is like just details in so many parts of this game. If you just like kind of stop, maybe, you know, after you're done fighting something, just kind of stop and just like look at all the details in these scenes that I'm in, and what the fuck is that in the background? Like there's so
Right.
so much of that in this game. Like I think one of the clear strengths through all three of Red Candle's games so far is they are just crazy good at like evocative visual design. And Nine Souls, just because it's a colorful Metroidvania doesn't mean they took this game off.
Yeah, I mean, it is a departure for them because their previous games were more set in like the real world, or like
Right.
a
Yeah.
kind of like horror-ified take on the real
Yeah.
world, whereas
Yeah.
this is like a fully, you know, fantasy sci-fi setting. But you know, I think they bring a lot of the same like, you know, tricks to the what they're doing here, the way
Yeah.
they
For sure.
portray it.
There's a bunch of new tricks too. So real quick, I want to give a shout out to the lead artist, and I hope I'm going to say their name right, Pege Ho, the lead artist on Nine Souls. And I want to shout them out and shout out, you know, new tricks in this game too, because it's not all just presented in this hand-drawn, colorful, beautiful Metroidvania level setup. There's a lot of new visual flair that they throw in, a lot of times for storytelling purposes.
Yeah, for sure. The game will go into like these different kind of ways of telling the story.
Hmm.
So you'll be going through the world, and all of a sudden, one of the characters will break in, and it's kind of like a Metal Gear Solid like codec conversation, right? Where you
Right.
see like the character portraits, and you know they'll be talking with text boxes. But then you also get things that are kind of like a flashback, where you know one of the characters will come in, and then the scene will completely shift to something that happened in the past, or especially when you get to bosses, you get these cool things that are kind of like a motion comics kind of thing, where it's literally you'll like see a comics page, and it'll fade in the various panels of the comic
Hmm.
along with the text bubbles in it, and with a little bit of movement and shifting and stuff. So it really kind of varies it up. They've got like, you know, 5 or 6 different ways of, you know, kind of having story segments. So it just there's a lot of different like styles and visual, you know, tricks that they have to kind of keep you entertained.
Yeah. In a lot of like key confrontations or like, you know, meeting a big story relevant NPC for the first time, they'll do something other than the two characters just stand on the screen and have speech bubbles talking to each other, because there is very limited voice acting, but they're not voicing out entire lines. There are little barks and stuff like that, and then there are a couple of cutscenes where there is actual voice acting, but it's very limited in here. So often those key scenes will go in those the motion comic style, and I thought those were awesome to see. Like they don't do it too much, but every time one popped up, I was like, this is gonna look really cool. And I'm also, like I said, I'm intrigued by the story too, and this is how a lot of big story scenes are presented. So those were probably the standout for me, other than just like the general artwork of the regular levels and stuff like that. Those comics were awesome.
Yeah, I think my favorite is the scenes where, well, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that he ends up talking to his sister Heng at
Yeah.
various points through the game. They do a really cool thing. Like, I think there's probably 6 or 7 instances where he'll do this in the game, where you'll be, doing something in the just kind of Metroidvania world that he's venturing through. Like, he'll be riding on. There's this one part where you're kind of like riding through, like on a gondola through like these big towers that are power generation devices.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, Heng will pop in and say a few lines, and then the whole scene will shift to something that is the same but different. But it's a flashback, like memory sequence. So instead of going through this kind of like sci-fi power generation sequence in that one that I mentioned in the flashback, Yi and Heng are riding on this kind of like gondola thing through kind of like a ruined city, and these big towers are like apartment blocks that have been destroyed, and then they're telling you the story of, why is this stuff all run down? Like, what is it about this age that they're living in, that where they're living amongst these ruins?
Mm-hmm.
And so just like I think those were my favorite visual things, just because of the way it kind of blends like what's happening immediately in the game with these kind of more fanciful uh, scenes that are showing the background of the world. It's very creative.
Yeah, 100%. Just a really, really good looking game. And another note that you had made here is that once again, if you know about Chinese history and you can recognize historical artwork, artifacts, things like that, you will recognize things in the game. Like, there are these bells that are used for puzzles throughout the story. And it turns out those bells are from real history. They're just repurposed as, this is what the bells look like in this, this part of the game and stuff like that.
There are bells that belong to some emperor that were dug up in, some field in China in, the 70s. And, now they're in a museum somewhere. And they just literally took that design, that mechanical design, and, put it in the game. And, I took a East Asian history class in college, and, that was a long time ago. So, I kind of barely remember the stuff, but, I was seeing some imagery in the game that kind of like, oh, that sort of rings a bell from stuff that I had seen in the textbooks from that old class I took. And it turns out like the way that some of the treasure chests in the game, it's like literally a bronze ritual vessel from like 1000 BC. And, they've got the same, visual signifiers and all that kind of stuff. So it does seem like, they were just drawing from, real history in that respect. So
absolutely. So their previous 2 games were set in the real world, and this one's not, but it definitely draws inspiration from the real world, both in the story and in the art, for sure. The music, you can say the same for the music too, is credited to FFXX, Im Baek, Troy Lin, and Vincent Yang. A lot of people contributing to the soundtrack in Nine Souls, and this is a really good soundtrack. I don't have the vocabulary to really like describe what it is, but it's a cinematic soundtrack. It's one that is meant to be in the background, accentuate moments. When you listen to the soundtrack, if you go on YouTube, you'll hear, the big swells, or you'll hear, this is when this picks up for combat music and stuff like that. But the key thing that really sticks out, and it's in comparison with a lot of other games in the genre, a lot of other video games that we play in general, is the instrumentation does have a lot of that, stereotypical, for me, when I think East Asian music, this is what it sounds like. These, woodwinds and, chimes and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of cool, really cool percussion, uh,
Yeah.
with kind of, these traditional instruments, at least it sounds like to me. But then it's basically, all, it's like the drum track and an electronic track will be made out of that stuff, right? So it's pretty high energy, upbeat kind of stuff,
Hmm.
but with this really interesting instrumentation.
Yeah. The other interesting part about the soundtrack to note is there's a lot of songs that have vocals in them, but vocal tracks where the voice is used as just another instrument in the arrangement. I don't know if they're singing real words, but it's definitely not a song where like the vocals and the lyrics are like in the forefront of the song. For a lot of them, I think there's one at the end that's like an actual, song where if you speak Chinese, you could take something from this song at the end of it. But for a lot of them, it is maybe it's more like traditional vocal styles too. Just kind of adding like a rhythm and, well, yeah, a pitch, obviously, but a lot of like rhythmic vocals too.
Yeah, they do the thing, and I wish I had the, better vocabulary to describe this, but they do the thing where there's kind of like a chorus of voices, and yeah, they're just kind of vocalizing and, making sounds, but then they'll really process that electronically and like kind of
Mm.
chop it up and put filters on it and stuff. So it sounds really wild. The game that it reminded me of the most was the Nier Automata soundtrack. It's
Yeah,
one of
yeah,
my
yeah.
all-time favorite soundtracks, and whenever it brings in those kind of like vocal chorus elements, that's when it really reminded me of the Nier Automata soundtrack, and I
Yeah.
always really like that kind of stuff. It sounds very exotic and just kind of like, because sometimes it can sound kind of creepy and
Hmm.
inhuman, just because of the way they treat the vocals. Yeah.
Yeah, and the sound design is quite good. When the game wants to creep you out, they'll use some of that music too, and they'll also use the sound design. Again, they cut their teeth making horror games, and when they want to have something be weird or creepy or outright scary, they pull that off with ease as well. So let's take another music break. Let's listen to a bit of that, so you can hear what I'm trying to describe, rather than hearing me continue to flail around trying to describe it. We can listen to some, and when we come back, we'll talk about what it's like to play Nine Souls. Let's talk about the combat first, and we've touched on this before, but let's set up how this combat works, and then let's talk about difficulty, as that's going to be part of any conversation about this game. So this is a Sekiro-inspired parry-based combat system. You get the ability to dodge around. You get a dodge at the beginning of the game, and then you get an air dodge maybe halfway through the game. Double jump comes fairly late in the game for a Metroidvania. So for a long time, and this is part of that steep slope of difficulty at the beginning, is because you're expected to learn how to parry first in combat. It is a defense and then respond type of combat system. So you have a parry system. You can perfect parry attacks, where E has this fucking awesome animation for when you press the parry button. He'll like flip his hands around like he's fucking what's the guy's name in the Karate Kid, like deflecting blows. Mr.
Yeah,
Miyagi, that's his name.
it's the
Yeah.
thing when you see like in a kung fu movie where the guy's kind of like doing block moves on like a dummy, right? And he's
Yeah.
kind of blocking it from like all these different directions with these hand motions and stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what he's doing like during the real like fights, which is
It's
pretty awesome.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you hit that perfect parry, you don't take any damage, and you gain yourself what's called a key charge. We'll talk about those later. But perfect parrying is the name of the game. If you don't get perfect parries, you will still block some of the damage, but you will take a kind of temporary damage called internal damage here. That will heal over time if you don't get hit, but if you get hit again, then it's all taken away. It's similar to your temporary damage in Bloodborne, except it will refill over time, not when you attack other enemies.
Yeah, this is something, the internal damage stuff. It took me a long time to understand how that works, and in fact, I don't think I really totally like got it and until I kind of like just spent hours like fighting a final boss and like really kind of understanding the
Yep.
mechanics in like a granular way. But like towards the it's something that changes over the course of the game a lot in terms of what you can do with it. And at the beginning of the game, it's mostly just you get in a fight, you take some real damage, you take some internal damage, and then you wait for a while after the fight for the internal damage to like come back and regenerate. But what ends up over the course of the game, you get various skills that you can kind of manipulate it, and it ends up turning into basically like a regain system, like Bloodborne. Because if you, let's say you do enemy like does a 3-hit combo on you, and you parry all of them, but you do like the kind of imperfect parry on the first two, and then the perfect parry on the last one, you'll regain like that. The perfect parry will basically regain some of the internal damage, and you can also make it so that if you hit the enemy, you get internal, you regain the damage. So there's a lot you can do with it. And the other thing is that enemies take the internal damage too, which is also confusing. So there's a lot going on. You don't have to understand all the details of it like right off the bat, but yeah.
Part of the like process of getting good at the combat in Nine Souls for me was seeing that I had internal damage and not panicking. Like just kind of like being like, okay, yeah, let's try and hit some parries here. Maybe because like it doesn't refill quick enough for you to back off and like, run away from an enemy or something, like, especially in a boss fight. Like it refills pretty slowly if left to just do it naturally. So you kind of just have to get comfortable with that as like, this isn't real damage yet, but I need to just focus on not watching that bar. I need to focus on the enemy here. And it took me a while to get into that.
Yeah, it is kind of it gives you a little wiggle room to play like just slightly under perfectly and still get away with it. It's kind of how it how it ends up being. Yeah.
Yeah. You have attacks just like in a lot of these parry-based games that cannot be parried, although I would say the huge majority of attacks in the game can be parried. Projectiles, once you get a skill to do that, like a Metroidvania upgrade skill, you can parry just about everything. There are some things that you can't, but you can either like jump, you can dodge to the side, or you end up getting 2 other kinds of parries throughout the game. So like, parry fest sickos, Nine Souls is your game because there's 3 different kinds that you do in this game by the end, and you need all of them. You need to be good at all of them to beat the final boss.
Right. At least if you're playing on normal. I think there's more wiggle room on story mode. And I think that is something that we should talk about at some point, maybe a little bit later. But there's a little bit more like a wiggle room of not having to do it like exactly. But I think one of the big adjustments for me is, so you do have a iframe dodge in this, which, if you played Souls, you've got, you've got your block, you've got your iframe like dodge roll, and you got parry if you're like really good at the game, which is something that like I never do in Souls games because it's like too hard. And sort of like if you were to organize them with how skillful you have to be to use them, right? Like the easiest thing is just sit there and block with your shield, and then the next thing is to like dodge roll through the enemy's attacks, and then past that is like parry, which is kind of like an advanced technique. But it's almost the opposite in this game, where like parry is like the best thing to do, and it's the thing that you have to be able to do, right? Because you can do it really fast. If the enemy like launches like sequence of attacks, you can parry all of them. You can parry fast, right? Like there's essentially no cooldown on the parry. You can do it
Right.
as like
There is a
fast as you can.
cooldown on the dodge too. So
Right.
like that discourages you from like the Dark Souls dodge roll spam fest.
Right. Yeah, because you can't do these dashes fast enough
Yeah.
to really like, get away from all the enemy's attacks.
Right.
You mostly, you can basically dodge through one and hope it gets you far enough away to like, just escape the rest of the enemy's like attack sequence.
Right.
But that was like, I think that was one of the things at the beginning of the game that made it so hard is like the, those things are reordered. So, whereas like normally in a game like this, I'd be like really kind of like my first instinct when, and with like an attacks coming in, it'd be to dash, right? You have to
Yeah.
kind of retrain yourself to be like, no, I need to parry this. Like that's the thing that's going to kind of get me through this fight. And the other thing that it does is that, you build up the chi charges from doing
Yeah.
that, which is like the other half of the parry system.
Yeah. So we said at the beginning that this combat system is defense and then response. So your defense should be most of the time to parry. Whatever form it wants you to do, that's what you do. And then once you have an opening to attack, you have a 3-hit combo that E can use, like, just a melee hit combo. But that doesn't do a ton of damage. That will build up damage for sure, and you should do it when you get a chance. But the best option is to use these talismans, and it's mapped on. So parry is on left bumper L1, and the talisman's on R1. So you slap this talisman on, E does like this dash, and it's like a sticker, like something, you just slap it on the enemy and then it explodes. And that does more damage than your sword melee attacks do. It was never quite clear from the thing. Like, it's not a sword. So is E's like just slicing so quickly that it's like causing like shockwaves in the air or something like that?
Oh, like his just regular sword attacks?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is something that the game never explains, but if you look closely at the animation, I don't think he actually has a sword.
No, it's his, but it looks like a sword slash.
Yeah, I think it's like energy. It's kind of like
Yeah.
an energy sword that he's like protecting from his hand, and the block thing is the same, right? So if you do a perfect parry, he does this kind of like he does like the sort of blocking attack with like his forearm, right? But then what appears is it's the same like green energy, and it's like makes a little yin yang symbol,
Yeah.
right? And it also makes like a gong sound, right? When you do that, or like is it? I get they're more like symbols actually. So it's like a symbol crash. And
It's
then
a really
imperfect.
really clear and identifiable sound effect. So when you hit the perfect parry, you know.
Yeah, and the imperfect parry has like a different sound, but it's still kind of interesting and percussive. So like as when you get to the later bosses that are launching these like long sequences of attacks and you're pairing all of them and you're like flying up in the air and stuff, it has a real like kind of musical cadence to it.
Hmm.
And sort of you get this sort of like feeling like you're dancing with the enemy or something. It's a really cool effect.
Yeah, it is. So after these parries, when you have a chance to attack, you use these talismans to do the majority of the damage. For me, is probably weighted more towards talisman damage than like melee hit damage. The default one, you have to hold down R1 and charge it up, and then it will explode. There are different kinds that you can get throughout the game. You can get a weaker one where it will explode on a timer and you don't have to hold the button. And that's the one that I used for the entire game. And then you get a stronger version of the charge where you can like charge it for like 2 beats and it will do like mid damage, or you can charge it to the maximum. It will take like a couple entire seconds to charge up, but it will do more damage that way. And I use that middle one because I would rather just like slap the talisman on, get ready to dodge more. It will explode when it explodes, but I need to be ready to defend.
Yeah, the mechanics of this like slapping the talismans on the enemies and then detonating them, it's really intricate. So there's like really like I think getting the hang of being able to use like the most powerful version of these talismans is kind of like it was sort of like the last key that I needed to unlock to feel like I was like really kind of understood the game and was like
Yeah.
good at it, like in terms of playing it. And The thing that's interesting about this is, so there's a couple things that are different about the way this works than like a normal like parry riposte kind of like sequence. So
Yeah.
one thing is like you do the parry, you can, so the normal way, like if you take the most basic enemy, like the rhythm of this would be like the enemy runs up to you, they swing their sword at you, you parry it, and then it kind of stuns them for like, I don't know, a couple hundred milliseconds, and you use that time to dash through them with the talisman. So the interesting thing about this is that it's kind of a combination of like an iframe dodge and an attack. So it's like you dash through them, right?
Yeah.
And then because you're on the other side of them at that point, you have a brief period of time that you can hold down that same button to then detonate the thing, right? But it's a lot to keep in your head. It's a lot to do with your hands.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of throws it at you right at the beginning. I think that's kind of why like the sort of initial learning curve in this game is so steep, is because like that sort of the default talisman style is so intricate.
Yeah. I think that was one of the big things that led to the difficulty being like really front loaded in the game. And then, of course, like the last two bosses were very difficult. And there's a couple in the middle that took like, a solid half hour to an hour of attempts for me to beat as well. But at the beginning, it felt like the cards were really stacked against the player at the beginning. And it felt like, all these little micro decisions for like how these systems work were all flipped on the side of like, make the game harder, make them fucking learn this game at the beginning of the game. So like a couple examples of that, like in Sekiro, for example, if you don't hit a perfect parry, it doesn't damage you. It damages your posture, but you can get away with not perfectly parrying like 4, 5, 6 attacks in a row. In Nine Souls, you're dead if you don't. If you miss that many in a row, you're dead.
Yeah.
The talismans need to be charged, but bosses don't just chill while you're charging up talismans.
Right, like the regular enemies usually do. With the bosses, you're not gonna, you really have to pick and choose. Like, do I have enough time to to actually hold this thing down and detonate it?
And
Kind of thing.
they get into a little bit of that design where like one attack flows into another attack, flows into another attack, flows into another attack, where it's like, if you're using that talisman style, there are, certain like big attacks that if you parry them the right way, the boss will get stunned, like really stunned. And that's your chance to use those big exploding charged talismans. There's also, you get, I forget what they're called, jades in this game. They're like badges in Hollow Knight where you can,
it's like the exact same system as Hollow Knight.
Yeah. You can customize
one of many places in this game that I feel like this is basically Hollow Knight.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good system. It's a good way to kind of customize your specific play experience. But at the beginning, you don't have a lot of these. And so the beginning of the game really feels like, all the critics of Sekiro, like the negative criticism towards Sekiro's combat system is that you do not really have agency in the fights other than learn to do them perfectly the way the developer meant for them to be done perfectly. And like, other than like the Sunni legend types that are going to use the special items and stuff to, to just wipe the floor with those boss fights. The beginning of Nine Souls really felt like that too, where I do not have any different ways to approach combat scenarios. I just have to parry perfectly, and I have to pick the perfect spots to use the talismans, and there is nothing else I can do. That's all I can do. And as you go through the game and as you get your Metroidvania upgrades, as you get more of these jades where you can kind of fine tune to your play style, how you want those to go, I felt that loosen a little bit. Like, that's not to say that like, I'm going to roll into the final boss fight with a magic build that's completely different from the parry based. Like, it's not like that at all. But it's like, the final boss has this big attack coming toward me. I now have more than one option for how to not get hit by that attack. You know, if I want to punish that attack, there's one thing that I have to do. But if the object is just don't get hit right now so that I can heal, there are other things I can do. And those restrictions don't loosen totally as you play the game. And I would say they're mostly still there, but it never feels as harsh as it does in the first 5 hours.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because people do say that, this kind of parry based action game system is very prescriptive, and I don't think that's wrong, but I do think that because the game's so challenging, as you kind of learn it and learn, okay, these are the specific areas within this boss's attack pattern that I can sneak in damage and punish them. It actually does end up feeling pretty expressive, to the point that after I finally was able to beat the last boss on the normal difficulty, I probably spent an hour just watching videos of different people fighting it, just because it was so interesting to go and see oh, this person can sneak damage in this part. I never would have thought of that. And it ends up being a lot of details in the fight, right? It's not big changes where, oh, now I'm just shooting magic at it instead of fighting with a sword, but yeah, those kind of fine-grained details of figuring out okay, where are there chances to sneak in damage, how do you get away from this one, how do you read this attack versus that attack to be coming. There is actually a lot of, and the jades can make a big difference with that, with even small things. You'll have a jade that changes how far back the enemy attacks push you. So if you have that, you might be able to do imperfect parries, but still be within range to counter them. Whereas if you're not using that, it might push you out of the range of being able to counter attack. So that it's fine-grained little details, but once you get your head around the game, those things end up feeling like big differences.
Yeah. It's ways to kind of tailor your experience or be creative in the margins of these tough fights. But throughout the entire game, that through line still exists, where if you want to beat this boss, you need to learn every single attack that it does. You really can't I guess you could, but it's not wise to just be I'm just going to tank this attack because I can't figure it out. There's never a boss where that was a viable strategy for me.
You can't trade damage in this game.
Not at all.
You can't be oh, I'm going to have enough so that, I'll take some damage in this part of their attack sequence, but I'll also do some. You can't get away with that. You have to basically be expecting to, parry everything perfectly. And then, you'll have some room to make mistakes here and there, but you have to have a plan to get through it perfectly, kind of thing.
Yeah. And if you can't, then there's a couple options for you. If you are one of the people who will not turn the difficulty down, then you either have to learn or get fucked. That's basically what the game says to you. But you can turn the difficulty down. And there is a story mode difficulty that it doesn't just lower the difficulty down to where combat is trivialized. It sets up a bunch of sliders where you can tailor the experience. How much damage do I take? How much damage do I give? A bunch of ways that you can tailor the experience. Now, I beat the game on standard. It was very difficult, but I didn't really consider turning it down because even after that first 5 hours, when I was really mad, after that point, I was in that good flow of this boss fight's taking me an hour, sometimes 2 hours to do. But every time I do it, I'm getting a little bit better. I'm dodging that one attack better this time. And next time, that attack's not going to hit me at all. And so even on the final boss that's really, really hard, the time that I beat the final boss, I still had most of my health charges left. It was just you get to that point where they can't really touch you. I'm not super big on that feeling of I'm overcoming the challenge in the tough action game. I don't get that. A lot of times I beat the tough boss and I'm thank God I can go back to the other parts of the game.
Yeah, now I can play the game again instead of just beating my head against the wall. Yeah, I am usually like that too. Yeah.
Yeah, But I will say that in Nine Souls, I got into that mode where I got that really awesome feeling of like that winning time on these boss fights. They can't touch me. And it's a great feeling to
Yeah.
have such mastery over these, these things that just absolutely destroyed you the first several times you tried them.
Yeah, I saw someone describe that feeling in like a tough action game as like feeling like you finally got the jar unstuck.
Uh-huh.
Like that, you've been like trying to get this thing off, and all of a sudden it just pops off,
Yeah.
right? And that's kind of how it feels to like finally get to the mastery point on these bosses. Yeah,
Yeah.
the story mode is interesting. So my experience was a little different. Like, so I played this game like right at release, and I didn't really know too many. I think maybe like had only talked to like one or two other people that were playing the game at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was playing on normal. My experience mostly on the first playthrough. Yeah, there's a learning curve at like the beginning of the game, but then past that, mostly what was like discouraging to me was just there's like 4 or 5 bosses that you hit that are just like big difficulty walls. So
Yeah.
my process of playing the game was like really enjoying the game, and they get to a boss and just be like, oh my God, I'm never going to beat this thing. This sucks.
Mm-hmm.
And then, eventually you do. And, I think if I had known that turning it to story mode wasn't going to trivialize the game, then I definitely would have done that. I might have enjoyed my first playthrough more if I had done that. And I would suggest to people, unless you're like a action game expert or just someone who loves like a challenge, like don't be afraid to set it to story mode, because it's still like I would roughly say that the story mode in Nine Souls is like equivalent to like the normal or even hard difficulty level in like a typical Metroidvania game.
Mm-hmm.
So you're still going to get uh, an experience where you really need to you're playing the real game. You're really engaging with the mechanics,
Yeah.
but there's a little bit, it's not as like you don't have to be as precise, which is like the main difference. But yeah,
Right.
so that like if I had known that story mode was not going to trivialize it, I would have done that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that, when we talk about how hard the game is, I think that it's pretty telling that most people I've talked to, and not necessarily people that shy away from action games, most people I talk to beat this game on story mode.
Mhm.
Um, I think that it is less common to beat it on the standard difficulty. And that's not me like flexing gamer credentials or something
Right.
like
Yeah.
that. It's just, this is a really hard game and they give you the option. So people take the option. And then like, I think once that knowledge gets out and becomes more common as more and more people play Nine Souls, that, like you said, story mode is not, I'm not engaging with the combat systems. Story mode is just like a little breathing room for you
Yeah.
that probably should be there, to be honest, on the standard
Yeah.
difficulty.
I mean, I'm not sure, because I'm not sure what their design goals were. So I'm not sure, there's a couple things that just seem like obvious that they could have done that would have made it a little bit less intimidating. And, maybe they didn't want to do that. Like maybe they actually did want it to be like this kind of wall that, like they put up that, for whatever reason. But I think there's a couple of things that they could have done that sort of would have made it just kind of like a little gentler, maybe wouldn't have scared people off as much. So like one thing we talked about, the talisman attacks. So I think that they made the default one, the one that explodes like automatically.
Hmm.
I think that would have helped a lot, because it would have smoothed out that initial learning curve a lot, because that one's just a lot easier to use.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that like really they should have called like, and this would have done nothing other than like editing like a couple lines of text. Like they should have called like normal mode hard, and they should have called story mode normal, and that
Yeah.
would have matched like other games, right? Because it's like I said, I think story mode in this game is like roughly equivalent to normal mode in like your kind of average game, right?
Yeah.
And if they had just done that, make it default to story mode, call story mode normal, and then keep normal mode as a hard mode, if they'd done that, I think it probably would have like made for a smoother experience for a lot of people, including myself.
Yeah.
But by the end of my second playthrough, like I really did find like playing on like the normal mode at full difficulty, I found it very rewarding, and I was glad I did it by the end.
Yeah,
But
same
yeah,
here. I didn't do the secret phase of the final boss, which looks insane when I looked it up on
yeah.
YouTube. But I
That
did
probably added
enjoy.
like a couple extra 2 hours to like my fight of like the
Yeah,
last boss. Yeah, learning that third phase.
but I did enjoy the I did enjoy the challenge overall, and we've talked a little bit about like the design of this is very prescriptive. It is like learn the boss moves, parry where you're supposed to parry, attack when you have a window to attack, and there's not a lot of wiggle room in that philosophy. And I don't necessarily think that that's bad. I just want to go on record as saying that like I appreciate something like Hollow Knight or the Souls series that give you the option to build your character in different ways to attack situations with like very different strategies in a lot of cases. Like if anyone's ever watched or played a magic build in Hollow Knight, it's like they're playing a different game.
Oh, I should check that out. I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
That sounds
Um,
cool.
Nine Souls does not give you that option, but I don't think that that's necessarily bad to have it be prescriptive like that. We hear that word used in negative connotations a lot just because it won't let you figure out different ways to do it. I think that what they've designed within it would be bad if it wasn't as tightly designed and responsive as it is. But as it is, it's like a really tightly designed combat system that once you learn it, I think it really, really sings and it's really, really fun to play. And it's super rewarding when you get through those things that were, making you yell at the TV. It's just not going to give you alternate paths to that. You have to do it the way they want you to.
Yeah. Although I will say I've watched a couple of videos of people who are like playing this game at like really high skill levels, and like the stuff they're doing is like wild. So I mean, if you get good enough at this game, like the way they're approaching these bosses is completely different than the way I
Yeah.
fight them. And I thought I was like decent at this game at this point. So there is like the skill ceiling in this game is like it's really high.
I'm sure. Yeah. Let's talk about this as a Metroidvania now. So we've talked about the combat, we've talked about the difficulty, but I think that this is a really fun Metroidvania as well. So I kind of mentioned earlier, but I think the biggest thing that differentiates this from a lot of Metroidvanias is the order that you get your power-ups is different. The double jump is not the first thing that you get. The air dash is not the first thing that you get. A lot of times your Metroidvania power-ups are different kinds of parry that can be used on these statues or other obstacles around that are blocking paths to new levels. You really get the movement upgrades pretty late, if I'm remembering the order that you get them. You get like the combat upgrades first. So that leads to like, this isn't necessarily a game where until the very end, where I would get a new Metroidvania thing and then comb through the map again to pick stuff up a lot. Because a lot of times I picked up something that's useful in a couple of places that I might remember, but it's mostly a combat thing.
Yeah, and a lot of Metroidvania games, the basic like trick of the genre, right, is to like present you locks in the world, ahead of time,
Yeah.
and then you get the key later, and you get to go back to all those locks and unlock them, and that's kind of what's fun about it. And Night Souls does some of that, but yeah, like you said, not as much as like your typical Metroidvania. Like there's relatively low amount of stuff where you'll be like, oh, there's like this thing hanging from the ceiling. I bet like later I'll get a grappling hook and come back here and I'll have to remember where that is, or else
Mm-hmm.
I'll never come back and do that. And Night Souls has a little bit of that, but like it's just not as much as other games. And is mostly when I found myself backtracking through the world, it's because I skipped stuff because it was too hard the first time I
Mm-hmm.
got there. So it'd be like, I I can see that there's like something, if I go like take this passage like up from here, but like, you know what? I have like one healing charge, and I just want to see if I can get to the next thing,
That's
or
true.
the next
Yeah.
bonfire
It,
thing.
it
Yeah.
does it does have that Souls like, get to your checkpoint, rest there, refill your healing charges, and then you're not going to really refill those with few exceptions until you get to another bonfire.
Yeah, and the other thing is you run into quite a few like mini bosses in the
Yeah.
world. They call them like the Red Tiger Elite, or they've got various other names for them. And those things are like a little, I mean, they do kind of feel like, I mean, they're not nearly as hard as like the real bosses in the game, but they're pretty hard in like their own right, especially since sometimes you'll come to them when you're kind of under leveled. And
Yeah.
so mostly when well, I mean, this game doesn't have levels like literally, but you do get a lot stronger over the course of the game. And a lot of times when I found myself backtracking in the game, it was because like, oh, I need to like circle back and fight this mini boss, because
Yeah.
those things do have like they drop like really good stuff a lot of times.
Yeah, you do want to fight them for
Yeah.
sure. And that kind of leads into a really good part about this game as a Metroidvania is that optional stuff, the backtracking, like you'll go through a level and like for a lot of them, you can get to like 90% of the map your first time through it. There'll just be a couple places that you couldn't get to before. And then you come back later, and I always felt rewarded for doing that, for going back, going to those places, cleaning up the map, fighting those mini bosses. This game rewards you in really, really meaningful ways when you choose to do that. Even if your reward is just money is not like scarce in this game, but it's not plentiful either. Like I did a pretty good job of combing through the map, and I couldn't buy everything I wanted to buy, even by the end.
Yeah, on my second playthrough, I was kind of going for like a more of a completionist type of thing, and on that, I probably was able to buy everything that I wanted by like kind of like maybe 80 or 90% of the way through the game. But for the most part, yeah, there is like actually good stuff that's going to help you like get through the game that you're saving up for. So money does matter, and because the game's so hard, like basic, the things that'll give you a little bit of like you pick up these things that give you experience, and then they also increase like your attack power,
Yeah.
by just like marginally. But if you like track all those things down in the world, they add up, and they can make bosses that seem like like kind of like a huge wall and make it that much easier. So it does feel like sometimes games get into the thing where it's like, oh great, I did this like traversal challenge thing where I had to get over all these spikes and then a moving wall or something, and I got a new shirt or something, like it's like it looked a little different. It's like a cosmetic upgrade, and it's like, man, I don't know if that was like really worth the time. But
Yeah.
that doesn't happen in Nine Souls. Like you actually do like get rewarded for exploration and getting through all the challenges and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
some of the rewards are like you'll get new charges for your healing pipe. Didn't mention that before, but you heal by smoking a little pipe. It's a very cute animation and just a very fun way to heal. That's your Estus in this game. So you can find new charges for that. You can pay to upgrade the pipe so that it heals you more. You can find these poisons as items, pickups around. You give those to Shendong. He eats them and then brews some medicine that increases your max HP out of those.
That's one of my favorite systems for like a character power upgrade is you get to bring like poison back for your friend, and then once you bring him back, you guys can get drunk together, and it increases your health.
Yep, it's very good using his homemade brew.
Did you catch like how he makes the wine?
Oh yeah, it's a very very fun story. The other pickups that you'll get, a lot of them will be story as well. So you'll find lore pickups. You'll also find gifts that you can give to Shan back at the base, and those will get you little story and character scenes. And sometimes you'll get like tangible upgrades from them as well. But I always was excited to explore because I knew there was going to be something good for me waiting there. And in this type of game, one of my personal great joys in playing a video game is knowing that I can go explore a new part of a map. And that's the secret sauce in Metroidvanias to me, is getting that thing that lets me go back and explore more of the map. And then if I'm rewarded really well for it, which Nine Souls does, then that's just pure gaming joy to me. And Nine Souls hit that out of the park.
Yeah, I mean, some of the bosses take so long to get through that, like, once you get through them and then you can go explore the next area, it feels like you're like, oh, this is like so fun. I can finally, like, I got the shackles off and I can go like
Yeah.
cruise around this area and see all the weird stuff in the background and all that kind of stuff. So
There's also one more thing about the gameplay is as you fight, you get experience points, and it kind of fills up this little circular bar around in the top left corner of your screen. And this game has an interesting kind of Souls-like system where you will drop your money when you die, and you will drop progress toward the next full skill point. Because you fill up the bar, you get a skill point. If you die, you don't lose that skill point that you've earned, but if you're a quarter of the way to the next one, you'll lose that progress. So that's another thing that felt really harsh at the beginning, is you have two different kinds of currency, we'll say, and you drop both of them when you die, and you have to go back, do the corpse run to pick it back up. And it sometimes involves fighting the enemy that killed you the last time in order to get your shit back. The one kindness is that, like I said, if you earned a full skill point, you will not lose that when you die. And the skill tree is like pretty contained. I did fill out the entire skill tree by the time I got to the end of the game.
Yeah, you'll end up filling the whole thing out. Yeah, that was one thing that I kind of wish that skill tree was maybe bigger and it wasn't like so easy to like fill out the whole thing, because I think if you just play through the game normally, you'll end up kind of completing it like maybe 75 or 80% of the way through the game, and it could give you a little bit more feeling of having like a build that you're going for if you had to like kind of pick and choose like what parts of the skill tree you opened up.
Yeah, that's kind of a double-edged sword. You might end up with something like Control, where you can't fill out the whole skill tree, but there's like a couple paths that are like way more useful than anything else.
Yeah,
so like you're never going to pick anything else other than that.
Yeah.
So
That's probably is how this game would end up if they did that too, because like some of that stuff is like really important that you open up for, like, for the later bosses, like towards the bottom of the tree.
Yeah, for sure. So all told, as a gameplay experience, like once you come to grips with the combat, it's kind of like, little cycles, we'll say. Like you'll get to a new point, there's a new mechanic that's introduced, you're going to have to practice it on the enemies in the regular arena, and then the boss is testing you on that. Say you got a new kind of parry, or you got a bullet deflect mechanic or something like that. Like the boss is going to be your exam on that mechanic, and then once you get it, you're good for the rest of the game. So like it does, like it's a harsh teacher, especially at the beginning, but it is using sound like logic in teaching you these things. So by the time you get to like the hard bosses, you're not really still, wishy-washy on like, can I do this type of parry or anything like that? Like I could do it. And I was kind of resistant to the third kind that you get, because it comes so late. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it comes so late in the game. Like I was like, do I really need this? And the answer is yes, you really do need that.
Yeah. There is one boss that you fight like after you get that where you pretty much need to use it, and I think I probably could have saved myself a ton of time. So like when I got that thing, my initial thought was just like, oh come on, this is like for absolute expert players. There's no way I'm going to be able to do this, so I'm just going to not do it and get through it without using it. And then I eventually found out like, oh, this boss seems like so hard. Maybe I should try using that thing. And then as soon as I did that, like I was able to get through it. So it does kind of drill you on that stuff. And like, you kind of like have to get to like not mastery, but you have to get proficient or, competent with like the various like mechanics. Cause
Yeah. So once you, especially, I really think like once you get past that opening kind of wall at the beginning where the game is like, learn the basics, like master the basics. Otherwise, you will not get past these early bosses. Once you get past that point and like the Metroidvania design opens up and you're a master of those basic combat mechanics, I really, really enjoyed playing this game. It was like a very fun gameplay experience. Even if, I went through my standard things of like, I get to a tough boss, I died 20 times. I get mad. I go in the Discord server. I complain like this attack is unblockable or whatever. And then I beat it like 5 tries later. It's just the way it goes. I really, really enjoyed playing this game, like all told. And for a studio who has not to this point made an action game, for them to swing big with like a tough action game, I actually think this is really, really fun and a good gameplay experience.
Yeah, it's actually crazy how good the action gameplay is in this game, considering they've never made an action game before.
Yeah.
Like it's I don't know how they did it. Like, because I think the action in this is like as good as any anything in the genre.
Yeah, in the genre
Like for these
sure.
kind of like 2D, like Souls kind of like Metroidvania stuff. Like, I played like kind of like the big ones in that genre. I mean, there's Hollow Knight, of course, which I think the combat in this is, for my money, is as good as that.
It's
Hollow
different.
Knight.
Like you said, it's different focuses on like what you're actually doing in combat. Hollow Knight's all about avoiding, and this is all about standing in there and blocking it.
Yeah. And then I played that new like Prince of Persia game that came out earlier this year, The Lost Crown, and that one has a really great combat system as well. It's not as hard as Nine Souls, but it's like, I think it's like less prescriptive, if you want to use that kind of terminology. Like you got a lot more variation in like your basic attack moves, and it's more focused on that kind of stuff. That's also an excellent game, but I don't know, for some reason, the fact that they were able to like make a game that kind of stands in there with like the big guys of the genre on their first attempt at like even making an action game at all is wild to me. I can't believe they pulled it off this well.
Yeah, they did. So that leads us into the last part of the non-spoiler section here. If you have any wrap-up thoughts about Nine Souls, now's the time. But also, who would you recommend to play this game?
Well, I mean, the obvious thing would be just people who like, challenging action games, right? So, I mean, that would be one group of people for sure. If you like Sekiro, then you're probably gonna like the combat in this game. But I think also I would just say that anybody who likes kind of Metroidvania games in general should really check out Nine Souls, because I think a lot of the things that are good about Hollow Knight, they also show up in Nine Souls. It's got like the kind of like cell animation style graphics. It's got pretty intricate combat system. It's got a really interesting world that it's showing you that's kind of unusual and not cliched. So I think, just basically anybody from like those bags, I think, should really check this out. And, I'd encourage anybody, I'd encourage people to, if you've heard this game is hard, if you heard it's like Sekiro, things aren't exactly wrong, but you can play on a story mode and it's going to feel a little bit more like a normal, like a Metroidvania game. And I wouldn't want people to not play it because of those comparisons. So
yeah, for sure, the story mode is there for a reason, and there is no reason to not drop down to the story mode if that's what's going to be the best way for you to play it. I echo all of your recommendations, and I'll just add that if people really liked Detention and Devotion and you like Red Candle as a studio, I think a lot of the things that like made those games compelling is in Nine Souls 2. Not like staring you in the face. Like this isn't a horror game like those are, but those games had a lot of thematic material. So does Nine Souls. It's just in a different style of game. So obviously the action game fans, the Metroidvania fans, the Sekiro fans, if you have been waiting for a kind of 2D game to kind of do the same type of thing, then yeah, definitely check it out. But also the Red Candle fans, like I think that the things you liked about those older games, like me, they're in here too. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, if you think like, okay, they've made a game in a different genre, so it's not for me, but that's probably not true. If you like their previous games, you'll probably like this one too.
yeah, yeah.
And I
We're
would
just
just say, like, the next time that there's one of those game showcase things and people get mad that the sequel to Hollow Knight is like not shown,
oh
just
yeah.
don't get mad. Just play Nine Souls.
There we go. Yeah, that's another one too. Going to go out on a limb here and say that when this episode releases, Silk Song is probably not going to be out. If you're
That's
if
a
you're
pretty
waiting
good
for
bet.
Silk Song, play Nine Souls. It's real
Yeah.
good.
There you go.
So, little housekeeping here before we go into spoilers. Josh, is there anywhere that you want people to find you online? Anywhere you want people to go check out?
No, not really. I don't have anything to plug. I don't, I have a podcast or anything like that. So I would just say, like, join the Tales from the Backlog Discord.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people, including me, on there. It's got a lot of traffic, and it's a fun place to hang out. So if you've been listening to the podcast but haven't joined the Discord, you should do that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm glad that you enjoy being there. It's a good thing to find good online spaces to hang out, for sure. And I think our Discord server is a good place for people to join. So yeah, if you haven't joined, feel free to join. And then if you want to support the podcast, you can leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, like and comment on YouTube. That helps as well. You can listen to my other show called A Top 3 Podcast, where we do top 3 lists. We draft topics. It's a comedy show. And then last but not least, you can support monetarily at patreon.com/realdavejackson. That is a wonderful way to help support the show if you're able to. I appreciate everyone who does. And there's some treats in it for you too. It's not just, good feelings. So that is all for the non-spoiler portion of the episode. We're going to listen to a bit of music. We're going to do the thank yous and shout outs per usual. And then when we come back, it will be full spoiler time for Nine Souls. All right, before we get into spoilers for Nine Souls, I would like to take this chance to thank the people who support the show over on Patreon. Big shout out to Chris Nelson, the Top 3 Podcast crew, Zulgeek, Chris Copleen, Eric Guess, Rick Firestone, Nick Ficori, Jill, Jeff, formerly Jerf, Kieran, Soccer, Cupcake, Kyle, Christian S., Matt aka Stormageddon, JD, Doug Leaf, Jason Emery, Brian Skirsha, Randall, Jake Martin, Jenny E., Marcus O'Neill, David Stecco, Stefan, William Prentice, Drellish, Rob Smith, and many more. Thank you all for your support so much. It means the world to me. If you'd like to be like them, go to patreon.com/realdavejackson. And with that being said, let's get back. Full spoiler time for Nine Souls. Okay, we're back, and it's full spoiler time for Nine Souls, and I wanted to kind of break this up, talk about some of the themes at the beginning of this that kind of set up the competing ideologies and inform, why did the story happen? Why did it play out the way that it played out in here? So I talked in the non-spoiler part, this idea of science, progress, technology, kind of butting heads with the Taoist belief in here. So I did not know anything about Taoism before putting together podcast notes. And just broadly, I'm not an expert. I'm not going to pretend to be one, but broadly, it's the belief in the importance of harmony with the Tao, which is generally understood as an impersonal, enigmatic process that just kind of like binds reality together, right? It's this unseen force, this unseen thing. And this rose to prominence in China in the real world during a period called the Warring States period. So during a time of great military conflict, this like very opposite ideology rises up in opposition. And what's cool is that this mirrors the story and the backstory of the Solarians in Nine Souls. They just call it the turbulent period, but it was a period of military conquest and stuff like that. And this competing ideology that's very, in tune with nature and the planet and things like that. And this mysterious force is there to oppose this military state that's going on at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a change between that kind of period of, I guess the turbulent period is what they call it, and what comes after that, which I think is called the origin era or something like that. And it's so there's this group called what did they call those guys again? It was like the kind of council that Lier founds.
I did not write down the name of the council that he founds. He basically founds like this council of scholars and scientists and like people that come all around, in the pursuit of knowledge. And it becomes like this society not based on, powerful rulers or something like that, but like a society based around learning. And
they're kind of like a group that's basically trying to get all these like warring states to like stop fighting kind of thing. And then like and they use kind of like technological progress to accomplish that.
So it's interesting. This is another parallel with the real world that comes up later in one of the game's endings, but like ultimately this society built around science and progress and learning and things like that, inevitably we use that for weapons. Like think about like the real world here. Where is like the most technological progress being made in our society, in our country, in the United States? The military is researching all of that shit for military purposes. And that's what happens in this game too with, they basically one side creates the Death Star and one side creates the atomic bomb is basically, and then they have this mutually assured destruction until one side uses it's called the rhizomatic bomb, but one side uses the atomic bomb, and that puts an end to this military conquest, but it also sends like great guilt and doubt into the leader of that, Lear. It reminded me of like the story of Oppenheimer a little bit.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, it does sound kind of like that. So I guess like that character, like Lear, or I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce it exactly, but from what I read, he's basically supposed to, I guess like his name, like in the untranslated version, is basically what we know in like the Anglosphere as like Lao Tzu, I think is the name, who's like the great sage of Taoism. So yeah, he's basically like a stand-in for this like real historical figure within the religion.
Right. And I think a lot of like we said, a lot of the characters are actually like stand-ins or like, at the very least inspired by historical figures.
So he's kind of like a cross between like an Oppenheimer figure who sort of like brings a period of peace through technological warfare kind of thing, or maybe it would be more accurate to say the developing a technology that allows them to bring an end to period of warfare. And that ends up being pretty, I mean, I think we're going to talk about this later, but that ends up basically being the same thing that Yi does, like in the events of the game, which I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely cycles. And like, so one of the cool things about the story is like, we have these two very different ideologies here. We have the Taoists that are like very focused in Nine Souls. They're very focused on this balance with nature, focused on the primordial roots as, kind of like almost like godlike figures, supporting the energy for a lot of the, technological progress and stuff. That's like a part of the world building for people who didn't play, is there's these roots called Fusang, or primordial roots that are just basically like infinite energy sources, but it's alive. And so it's kind of
Yeah, they
revered as,
describe it as rhizomatic. So it's kind of
yeah.
like it's I think they say it's a plant, but the way they're describing it kind of sounds like a mushroom colony, where it's
Hmm.
sort of like it's sort of like this one giant being, which is made up of all these like little strands that are like go out throughout the entire world and basically
Right.
harness the power of the sun to basically give life to the Solarians.
Right. So we have this faction that kind of like wants to become more one with the roots, focused on, knowledge, progress, learning, things like that, but also, death by technology, to prevent the other side, which is this side of military conquest. The military thing goes away, but then we have these two competing beliefs. And you mentioned like the side of like taking inaction as like the best
Yeah.
course, and that then becomes the opposing force to the science. So like the
Well,
people who were on the forefront of the science, Lear
yeah.
and his people, they took it too far. They used the atomic bomb,
Hmm.
and then they denounced all of it and
Yeah.
like disappeared.
Lair has like this he has this revelation that what they've done has not produced the effect that he wanted. And then
Yeah,
what he does is so the Fengshi Guild is like the name of the
that's
group.
right. Yeah,
Yeah. So he basically disbands them.
yeah,
He takes them into seclusion on an island, and they basically go into hiding. And at that point, a religion grows up around the legend of these legendary warrior scientists who retreated into a state of occlusion.
yeah. And then rising in opposition, because whatever the dominant culture in the force is, or the dominant force in culture is, will always have an opposing force that rises up to go against it. So it was them rising up against the military force. Then they denounce the progress in science that they've made, and they retreat into this like more obviously like pacifist and just kind of like more spiritual way of living. And then this religion forms up around them. And then the opposing belief to that is the people who want to pursue science again,
Right, which is
which is,
where Yi comes back into the
yeah.
story, right?
So
Like
that's
in
where Yi
yeah.
comes in. That's where his mentor, Aigong, comes into it. And the kind of one of the central kind of things that happened in Yi's backstory is that his sister Hang was on the other side. She was on the side of the Taoists who didn't want to pursue all of this knowledge, didn't want to, leave their home when disaster struck. Inaction is the course of action for them.
Hmm.
So I thought this was cool to kind of set this up. So we have these competing ideologies, and they're shifting and evolving over time. And this leads to like the actual inciting event for the Solarians is, while studying ways to improve the Solarians, Aigong got obsessed with immortality, creates this virus that's unleashed and wipes out most of the Solarians. It's wiped out a lot of people, and whoever's not dead now, they will be soon. So it's like we have to make a plan basically, and this is where
Hmm.
Yi's plan comes in, the Eternal Cauldron Project.
Right, yeah. So basically, she's got this sort of genetic manipulation research going, which unleashes this Tianhuo virus, right?
Yeah,
I think is the name of it. And it pretty much ends up like progressively devastating the world that they live in.
yeah,
Um, so they've started to swing if you got your Taoism, like, the warlike stuff that, is associated with the Jie kingdom, they've started to swing the needle back towards like the, you know, warlike end of the spectrum. And that's what kind of unleashes the virus on the Solarians world.
It's twice now that science has gone too far,
Yeah.
or either gone too far or a mistake was made that is unleashing devastation. So, but
And you don't really learn this until like the very end of the game, pretty
right.
much. Like,
Yeah. And in one of the ends of the game, one of the endings, we'll get into that. So their plan, which I think is pretty cool, is this section, this island where, Lear and his people went into obscurity, basically, and you find their bodies, like they just died in a cave. So this island where they figure out the technology to break this island off of their planet and send it out into space.
Yeah, it took me a while to figure this out. Like I didn't realize like that, and that's like the area that you go through in the game is like basically they cut out this entire island as a chunk and they turn it into a spaceship.
Yep. And they sent it out. They sent it out into space, and they put the Solarians who could go on board, put them into like cryo sleep. Basically, they had this new technology set up that E kind of was a part of. That people would just be in what was called like their dreamscape while they're sleeping, waiting for the station to absorb energy and power research to find a cure. That was how I understood this.
It gets pretty complicated, but I think so. The basic idea is that they think they might have a way of like curing the Tianhuo virus, but they need time to do it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the point of the Eternal Cauldron Project, which is the name of this like way that they're going to take like a chunk of the population and put them on this world ship and send them out into space. And they're going to put all the people into suspended animation. And that's what that soulscape thing, right? It's like, it's basically where it's a virtual reality environment that the people's minds will exist in while their bodies are kept in a suspended animation, with the goal being to, in the time that it takes to run these computer simulations to figure out a cure for the virus. So it's all about like buying time.
Yeah.
Right.
But there's one problem with this, which is, very metal, cool idea, is they need literal brain power to sustain these soulscapes, so that people can, so they can survive this, basically. So they needed to find an intelligent species with sufficiently, powerful brains to power all this. And it just so happens that they found Earth, which they call the pale blue planet in the game. And what they did is they parked the station in orbit around Earth, blocking the sun so the roots can absorb the energy from the sun. So the Earth goes into an ice age.
Yeah.
They gather some people from the surface, bring them back, and raise them as livestock to harvest brains, which is fucking cool.
It's pretty crazy. Yeah. They're basically livestock, like you said. And they call them ape men in the game. I don't remember, like, if you don't get like the true ending, does it ever show you a picture of what New Kunlun looks like when it's like kind of surrounding the sun?
No, you don't. That's only in the the true ending. Yeah.
Okay. It looks pretty crazy. It's sort of like they take the fusang, right, like the roots, and they basically spread it out over a chunk of the sun, like they're putting an umbrella over the sun.
Yeah.
And so that's all to capture. It's sort of like in Halo, how like they have, the idea is that you like capture like the biggest chunk of energy that's coming out of a single star.
Yeah.
And they're using that to power these calculations that they need to run for their computer simulation. Yeah. But it's a pretty striking image because it kind of looks like this, the sun has like a big patch of mold on it.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of does in a way. So the kind of inciting thing here is that we have this project set up these soulscapes, the Solarians, the lucky few who are able to get on the New Kunlun ship, basically. There were a lot that were left behind, including the people who chose not to go, like Heng chose not to go. The people that are there are in this sleep, and the station is kind of watched over by the souls. Turns out there's 10 souls. The other one is E. He's the 10th soul. And there was a fatal flaw in the Eternal Cauldron project. Like, people, when they woke up from the soulscapes, even in testing, they went crazy, basically. And they pushed forward with the project regardless. And finding this out is what pushed E over the edge to confront them, basically.
Well, actually, I think this is the part of the story that's like the most unclear, and I'm not like exactly what causes him to break with Aegon.
Oh, it's two things. Yeah. I just remembered the other. The other one is he finds out that she was the source of the virus.
Right. Yeah. It's that. Yeah. So there's kind of like two big mistakes, right? Like, one is that like she was responsible for unleashing the virus in the first place. And then the other thing was basically like sweeping like the flaws of the soulscape system under the rug.
Yeah.
So that even when they brought like the Solarians out of their suspended animation, they weren't going to be coming out properly.
Right. And all the while, Aegon is E's mentor. She's taking this research. It's like she's one extreme of that science first, progress first ideology, because she realizes at some point there is not going to be a cure in the way that you want there to be a cure for the virus.
Right. Yeah.
But what she finds out is that a certain percentage of the population, when injected with the serum that she thought was a cure, allows them to live and makes them functionally immortal. They become these mutants that can't die through normal means. And this is what she's been obsessed with this whole time. This is why this was what caused the virus, is research towards immortality and improving the species. And she just like hyper fixates on this immortality and completely loses the plot of like, you know, what is the benefit of being alive if you're in this mutated feral state, basically? Like, you can't. Yeah.
It's sort of like, she's got a number of different like lines of research that she's pursuing all at once. And they're all geared towards achieving immortality, which is just something that she seems to want to do for whatever reason, right?
Science. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of them is like just, was like the original line of research that led to the Tianhu virus. And then there's like trying to find a cure for that. And then there's this other thing that she finds, which is like what makes these pink mutants, right? And so she got her own sort of like group of bodyguards called the Dusk Guardians. I think you probably ran across those guys in like the game. And so those are people that she's been experimenting on with this like serum that's like turning people into mutants. And that's sort of like merging them into like a Gestalt collective consciousness type of thing, which is, man, there's a lot of ideas like jammed into this game. It's kind of wild when you try to talk through the whole thing.
It is, yeah. So, finding out like what the truth of the plan is, basically the truth of the origins of the virus, the truth that Aegon is like kind of pursuing a serum, but it's all about immortality at the end of the day. And then the truth that they had obscured flaws in the Eternal Cauldron plan. That's what pushes E over the edge. And I had forgotten about this because this is how the game begins. I didn't mention this at the non-spoiler part, but he challenges Aegon to single combat. He loses. He gets kicked off a cliff. He falls to his death. You see this. This is the opening of the game. You just have no context for what you're watching. He gets like gathered in by the Fusang roots and revived over the course of years, and then he's back in like the human village. That's where you start the game at. But all the while, Aegon is going for these pushing further and further with this research and this one-track mind of just like, oh, I found a way to make us immortal. It doesn't matter what it actually is. The result is that the Solarians are immortal. So this is good. This is progress. And that's all that matters.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because like what happens is, so when he breaks with her, right? He gets like basically like kind of like interred underground for a while, while he gets kind of like revived by the Fusang, right? And then I think they say it's like 500 years that
Yeah.
he's down there, and in the meantime, like things on like New Kunlun are like really going bad, right? Like
Yeah.
so one of the things that's happening is that the people that are supposed to be alive and active outside of suspended animation are becoming mutants, right?
Yeah.
And so there's two groups of people that's happening to. There's the Dust Guardians, who are kind of like, they're kind of like the maintenance staff of the place, right?
Yeah.
And then the other group is the people who are in the kind of high class district.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and they're coming out of like, they basically are not following the rules and staying out of suspended animation, because like they just basically don't want to stop partying is basically what it comes down to,
Yeah.
which is really crazy.
There is that. And then there's also I think she was grabbing people from suspended animation to do tests on. You can
Right. Those
see.
are I think those are the Dust Guardians.
Oh,
Yeah.
those are the Dust Guardians.
I
Okay.
think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she represents like the evil side, the bad side of, scientific progress at all costs, basically. And that will play into the decision that, it's not a do this or do that decision at the end of the game, but like the different endings represent different decisions that E could make as to like how to progress after
Hmm.
this. And that, seeing what happened with his mentor kind of informs the decision he makes. What I think is cool is the game starts, you're on this very clear revenge trip. There's 9 souls, there's going to be 9 deaths. We're taking them all out. But
Yeah.
it's very clear for a while that E has no plan other
Hmm.
than kill the 9 souls.
Yeah. I mean, he just basically thinks that what Aegon did was like so reprehensible that she has to be stopped,
Yeah.
kind of thing. But what happens after that is like pretty unclear. And then the rest of the Tiandao Council, which is the group that the 9 souls, right? Like they're these kind of like, super scientists that have been brought together to do the Eternal Cauldron project. They basically like, she pretty much like made them all turn on him.
Yeah.
And so he wants like revenge on all them, and just basically to stop her and like her whole thing that's like that she's got going on.
Right. So it's cool. So we have the mentor, Aegong, who has this extreme tunnel vision in her pursuit of immortality and improving the Solarians, as she says, this transhumanist, trans-Solarian pursuit of hers. E is on the same kind of tunnel vision path, except his motivation is revenge. But they're both, mentor and mentee, completely blind to anything happening outside of their singular pursuit here.
Yeah. Well, until the ape men come into it, right? Like
Right.
that's sort of the thing that redeems or can potentially redeem Yi
Right.
and make what he's doing more than just a revenge quest.
Right. So Kwafu and Shan Shan and Shenong are instrumental in softening E, and especially like he grows really fond of Shan Shan when, cause like I think even in the time he was living in the village with the people, he still kind of saw them as below Solarians. They're an inferior species.
Well, they don't know anything, right? Like they're basically being kept in a
There's
state
probably
of
like
ignorance. Yeah.
there's no school in the Peach Blossom Village
Right.
for sure.
I mean, he
So-
basically thinks he's living in like, it's like if you or I were to like live in like a livestock pen, right? Like
Yeah.
we might have some kind of fondness for the cows, but we're not going to think that, they're like equal to us.
Right. It's
sense,
not
right?
until you find those gifts for Shan Shan, you can give them to him, and a lot of the early ones, like E's like, yeah, here's this advanced Solarian technological relic or a paint set or here's this thing. I don't expect you to be able to do anything with this, but like, here you go. Have some fun, kid. And Shan shows, all these aptitudes toward these technologies or these, art forms. He learns to paint. He gets good at the, like the checkers game that they play and eventually beats him. All of those things I think helps E see value in other things outside of his own quest. And, he's a person with no connection. His tunnel vision really, that's the reason he lost his sister, because she died. Like, you don't know that right away, but put two and two together. She's dead. She's on the planet. It's been 500 years. There was the virus. So he's a person with no connection at the beginning, and the people, his friends, but mostly the humans in the Four Seasons pavilion.
Yeah, I like the Four Seasons. Like they're staying at the Four Seasons.
Exactly. They're the key to softening him up and making him see a little bit of reason outside of this revenge quest.
Right. Yeah, it kind of gives him like hope for a future, even if that future isn't necessarily like have really much of anything to do with the world that he came from.
Yeah.
And I think he's like genuinely impressed by Xuan. Like, he is kind of like everything he picks up in terms of like whether it's like sword fighting or I think he like learns like computer programming at one point.
Yeah.
And then that gives you the ability to change the background of there's kind of like a screen that the seasons are projected onto, so you can change that. Or there's one part where you give him like a virtual reality helmet or like a visor, and then he plays detention on it, which is pretty funny. Yeah. But I think
he's a cheeky little line in there where he was like, detention.
Yeah.
That sounds boring.
Yeah, it sounds very fun. But yeah, I think he's genuinely impressed by him to the point where it kind of redeems like the ape man as a species in Yi's mind. And that kind of leads into what happens in the true ending.
Yeah. So he gets softened up along the way, we'll say, but that doesn't mean that the bloodlust doesn't continue throughout. So I think this is a good point to talk about some memorable boss fights and just any that stick out for any reason, really. So yeah, what's one that stuck out? Let's save the final boss for the final boss, but any others that stuck out to you?
Well, I think there's I think the first one, right, is the first. I think that's the first real like difficulty shock point, right? So the first one is you go to Kwafu's area to try to get his soul seal, but you end up basically rescuing him. But so you don't fight him, but you fight this kind of like cybernetic centaur guy.
Yeah.
Who is basically his guardian. And that one is like really tough because this thing is not going to give you any breathing room at all compared to like, if you fought some mini bosses or something up to this point. And so now you like really, he's going to do this thing where he charges from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen and then just immediately pivot and do it again.
Yep.
So you basically have to, it's basically a test to see, do you understand the rhythm of parry the strike as he's charging, dash through him onto the other side with the talisman application and detonate it. And that's how you're going to do damage, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not going to have a chance with the way he moves to really go up to him and just whack on him with your sword like over and over again.
Right. That boss really reminds me of the guy on the horse in Sekiro. I forget his name. He shouts his name at you 100 times. But
right. Yeah.
It reminds me of that early game boss. Very similar here.
Yeah.
One that was a big wall for me is I would say there were 4 that I thought were like particularly hard, like taking me an hour plus to beat.
Yeah.
The Lady Ethereal fight was one of the hardest ones, and that takes place in like the fucked up, like, oh, you forgot you're playing a Red Candle game here, visually designed.
Right, we're gonna go to Horror Town kind of thing.
So we're going to so we have like these virtual reality soulscapes. Well, how about a nightmare soulscape? That's what's going on in here. But her fight was just really tough, like a lot of different attacks. It has 3 phases, and she does a thing that took me a long time to get my wrap my brain around, which is summoning multiples of herself. And then so like she does an attack, and then like the last phase is like she has like 5 other things on there, and they're all doing these attacks at you. It's just kind of, it's not like they're doing different attacks, but it's training your brain to be like, oh, you can block it once. Now can you block it 5 times in a row?
Yeah. Oh, there's a couple things that, you have to kind of unlock in your head for that fight. And so one of them is that when you do like a parry in the air, it's not directional, right? So like if you're standing on the ground and an attack comes in from the left, you need to be facing to the left when you hit the parry button. Right. But if you're up in the air, that's not true. And so she does that thing with like, doing like double versions of herself, and they're going to be popping at you from different sides. So the key is to be up in the air when she's doing that, because then you don't have to be like, okay, now I need to go left, now I need to go right. You can just kind of jump up in the air and do the air parries. And it makes it a lot easier. And the other thing that's going to happen when she does that is that's going to pop when you parry in the air. It's sort of like a double jump. Like it pops you up in the air. And so she's going to be bringing these like sequence of attacks, and you're going to be parrying each one. It's going to be popping you up in the air. And so you can not come down for a long time in that fight. You just spend it up in the air, which is kind of wild because you haven't really done that to that point in the game.
And there's an attack in the final boss fight where like it finally messes with that, where like you parry something, it pops you in the air, and then she jumps in the air and tries to knock you back down to the ground.
Yeah, she does like a ground slam kind of thing where she
you have to, it's like the only boss that will like play with the fact that if you parried the attack before, they know you'll be up in the air, so the next attack is airborne.
Right.
And you have to be ready for that.
Yeah. But that fight is against Lady Ethereal is really cool, and it's the I think the reason that fight took me forever. There were like I think there were 3 bosses in this game where I just thought like, I'm just gonna have to stop playing this game. I'm never gonna get this.
So it's Lady Ethereal, the final boss, and what was the other one?
Jia Quan, like the guy, like the big strong guy who is just like, it's kind of like, I guess besides the Centaur guy, he's the first big dual fight who has like just a bunch. He's going to be launching like a bunch of sword combos at you and stuff like that. Yeah.
Did you poison him the first time you played?
Yeah, I did, but I still didn't. I mean, it's
still hard. For sure. That was one of the first ones where I got that great feeling of like, I died 20 times, but the time that I beat him, he didn't touch me. I basically aced it.
Yeah. That was like the first big like spot where I was like, okay, I like this game, but I think I'm done with it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then like I think I kind of mentioned it in the non-spoiler section, but this was the one where it's the first boss that you get to when you have the, what do they call it? I think it's called like the unbounded counter. It's the one where you like have to charge up the counter before releasing it when the attack comes in. And it's like he has a couple moves that he does that can only be, you can sort of dodge away from it, but not really. Or you can do the charge counter or the charge parry on him. And that's kind of the secret to unlocking it, because he has like a huge like open, like once you do that to him, he like goes down for like a few seconds and you just like wail on him, right? So that's like really your chance to do damage to him. So that's kind of the secret to that fight. And me being kind of stubborn, thinking that was like too hard and that I wasn't gonna be able to do it, kind of kept me from being able to get through that fight for a long time.
What was really helpful for me is realizing that I thought maybe it might have been a tutorial issue or it might have just been me assuming, but I thought you had to charge that for way longer than you actually do. Like You don't have to charge it for more than like half a second.
It's probably about half a second. Yeah, that's what I was gonna.
It's really quick actually. You just have to do more than a tap of the button. And then you're good. And it took me so long to learn that. But there were a couple attacks, I think one in Lady Ethereal's fight and one in the final boss fight, where those unbounded counter-based attacks come out really quickly. And I was like, how the fuck do I have time to charge this? And then like it finally clicked, like you don't actually have to hold it for 2 seconds. It's very quick. And once I got that down, I was pretty good. Trying to find the other boss that was like a huge wall for me other than the final boss. Oh, G took me a long time.
Oh, really? Okay.
And that's like not because it was like super hard. It's just there's a lot to learn in that. And
yeah,
it's not a game where, again, it's not a game where you can be like, oh, these 2 attacks, I just can't. I'll just tank those and deal with everything else. Like you have to learn everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the one that has the cool kind of like roulette system where you kind of like it's more like sort of like he spins a roulette wheel, and then when you jump on it, it chooses like a symbol, and that indicates the attack pattern that he's going to come out with at you after that. So that's interesting. Like you can kind of learn like what's going to be coming if you learn like what those symbols mean, and if you time it well enough, you can choose what the next phase is going to be.
Yeah, I could always pick the one that gave me a health refill or an extra arrow. Like I could very rely. I mean, this fight took me a long time, so I had a lot of practice on it. But yeah.
One thing that I thought was interesting about the Lady Ethereal fight is that I think from what I've heard, it's kind of like the one, there was like someone else on the Discord that was talking about this game that played it on story mode. And they were saying that like that was the hardest fight in the game, like by far on story mode. I think it's maybe because she doesn't have a lot of opportunities like in her attack sequence to like actually damage her. Like she's actually immune for like a lot of that fight, where like if you attack her, she just disappears because it's like her so I thought that was kind of interesting. Like that's one place where maybe the difficulty like scaling didn't work as well as like the rest of the game.
That's true. Yeah. I remember like I figured out a couple tricks to figure out which one was the real one, and then just slap a talisman on it real quick. Because even if she teleports away, the talisman will still explode. Yeah. And then I could like reliably do damage that way. She also, her third phase starts with this huge slam attack that will kill you in one hit if you get hit by it. And it's one of my least favorite things, where like this happened maybe 5 times where I would get to phase 3, get hit by that attack, die, and be like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm not learning. I'm just dying. Have the chance.
In order to be able to practice it, you have to get through the first 2 phases.
Yeah, which are still tough.
Which takes a while. So like, okay, I'm going to get one chance to practice this, and then I'm going to have to spend 10 minutes getting back here so I can practice it a second time.
Yeah.
And eventually I'm going to get it. But yeah, that is harsh. Yeah. The third phase of the final boss ends up being like that too.
I can only imagine. So like it took me, I want to say it took me like 2 hours of like, I played it straight through 2 straight hours of the final boss until I beat it. And I reached the point where I was like, you're doing a tough boss fight, and you think to yourself, like, I should walk away and like come back tomorrow.
Yeah. I did a lot of that when I was playing this game. Yeah.
So like you get to that point where you're like, I'm making stupid mistakes. I'm getting frustrated. I'm doing worse on each subsequent attempt. I reached that point in the final boss, and then I was like, I should quit, but I'll give it one more try. And then that was the try where I like did much better. Okay. And then I was like, okay, I can actually do this. Right. But I didn't do the true ending stuff that gives you that third phase. But I watched it on YouTube, and that attack where it like zigzags and slices across the screen and basically makes like at least half of the screen a hurt zone.
Yeah.
You have to just like be airborne in the right spot, or can you
Right.
parry it?
You're talking about that. Yeah, the slashes that go across the whole screen. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can parry them, yeah. But so the crazy thing is, so it's like a sequence of like 3 regular attacks, which can just be parried.
Mm-hmm.
But then one of them is red after that, which you have to get away from it.
Okay.
But so the thing is, you've been getting bounced up in the air by parrying the regular ones, but
Right.
then you still have your double jump. So you can see if the red's going to come, you just do a double jump at that point, and you basically get out of like the range of it. But
That's
it's a
good.
little hard to describe, but like it takes a lot of practice, and it's very like overwhelming, like visually, like when you first see it, like
Yeah.
you've gone through like so much effort to get through those first 2 phases, and then this thing happens, and it's just like,
Yeah.
oh my god, that is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very
It's
intimidating.
it would feel defeating, right? Like
Yeah,
it takes so much to get through the first 2 phases of that fight. And then to find A, there's a third phase, and B, there's this insane attack that will
right.
probably kill you the first couple times you see it.
Yeah.
But like, was it one of those where like, okay, I got killed during the third phase, but phase 1 and 2 are not easy, but like I can do that now.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like you end up mastering the first 2 phases before you have to give yourself the ability to get to the third phase consistently enough that you can learn it. So like
Yeah.
by the time I was able to beat like the third phase, like I could pretty much like almost every time get through the first 2 phases with only losing like 1 or 2 heals
Yeah.
out of 8. So
Yeah, that was man, it's such a hard fight, and but it was one where like I would spend 20 minutes of attempts, and at the end of that 20 minutes, I could basically always block one of their attacks. And then 20 more minutes, I've got another attack mastered. And it felt really good to do the final phase because it was like you pop the jar off the lid. You see the matrix at a certain point, and you're just like, oh, I've got this. Like I don't even need to look at my health. I've got this.
right.
And then the third phase comes. But
Yeah.
it all in all, like any complaints about difficulty aside, I think these are really fun boss fights, like pretty much across the board to learn. There's a couple that are just like a dude with an axe or something.
Yeah.
They're not as like memorable.
That's Chio's brother.
Okay,
Yeah.
Oh, right.
The merchant guy.
Right.
And
Yeah,
there's actually a cool thing that happens if you do all. So Chio's going to give you little tasks over the course of the game.
Yeah.
And if you do them, then Chio basically he ends up making a weapon because he wants to go kill his brother. Because what Chio is he's basically like a living weapon.
Yeah.
That somehow I'm not clear on like how he did it, but he like basically broke out of just being like a combat automaton.
Yeah.
And now he's like kind of like living with like free will kind of thing. But his brother is still stuck as just like basically a combat thrall. So he wants to go kill him. So at that last sequence where you're evacuating the research facility, when you're like going back to the pavilion after it gets attacked, you'll like run across him, and he's like dying because he went and tried to go fight his brother.
Oh.
But his brother won, and then you'll go in and basically fight his brother and kill him and bring an end to that storyline.
Okay, so I killed his brother for sure. I did that.
Oh, okay.
But I didn't do enough maybe of side quests or something like that. So when the pavilion got attacked, Chio just got worked in there. He was a pile of viscera in there.
Oh, really? So he's okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So he never leaves the pavilion. He gets attacked, or he gets killed in the pavilion attack then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Huh.
Yeah, so let's talk about those endings. So the bad ending, it does feel like the bad ending when pitted up against the true ending, but the ending you get if you don't do frankly a lot of side content. Like I looked at the list, and after you beat the game, you can load up your save right before the point of no return, and you can go do stuff, because the point of no return is like they let you know, like, hey, the Aegon's going to be up there. Make sure you're prepared. Make sure you finish your stuff. But I didn't really take that to heart. I was like, oh, I'll go fight her. I'll die maybe, and then I'll go do other stuff. But it's like a whole
Yeah.
sequence of other stuff, and the world is closed off after that. So you can go
Hmm.
back and do that stuff to get the true ending if you want. But I looked at the list of side content that you have to do to get it, and I was like, that's a lot, man. Like, I'm not going to do all that.
Yeah.
So,
It's not like, in some games to get like the true ending, you pretty much have to follow a walkthrough. Like you would never think to do that stuff.
right.
Like it's almost like, there's just like nobody playing the game like naturally would like ever think like, oh, you have to leave this treasure chest unopened in the first 2 hours of the game
Right. Yeah.
and kind of stuff like that, right? Like that's not really the case in Nine Souls. I think if you're playing it in like a really methodical, like completionist type of thing where like you're taking it really slow, and as soon as you can do anything, you go and do it and make sure that you've cleaned out like all the events before you move on to the next section. I think you would probably end up opening it up, because basically the way it's gated is as you bring the poisons to Shennong, he will at certain points, after he gets like half of them, after he gets like three quarters of them, that kind of thing, he'll say something about the other villagers.
Yeah.
And then that will basically direct you back to return to the ape-man village, which the ape-men have moved from the village into an area that's adjacent to the village, which is like this dock, which is like where
Yeah.
they kind of like launch ships in and out of like New Kunlun. And they're basically hanging out there. And then they have a sequence of various problems that need to get solved. And you basically go do that. None of them are very good from like a gameplay perspective. Like they don't add any like interesting new bosses or anything like that. But you'll go and like you'll go kill like a worm that has been attacking them or something like that, or like they'll just throw like a sequence of like 15 regular enemies at them and you like kill them.
Yeah.
But basically what that ends up doing over the course of that like quest line is Shen Nong basically, so he's kind of been like exiled from the village. He's like the weird guy in the village, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
they like he basically doesn't trust the other villagers and they don't trust him, and he just basically thinks they're like suckers who don't like understand the real world, because he's kind of seen behind the veil. He kind of knows that like something's up with Yi, like even before he goes into the ship. uh but so over the course of that quest line, he kind of ends up taking, how there's that one leader of the villagers who's like a shaman.
Yeah.
He basically takes over for the shaman, and the shaman gets killed, and he takes their place.
Mm.
So he becomes the leader of the villagers.
Yeah.
Um, and so at that point, they have someone to guide them. And what ends up happening is Yi comes up with a plan to basically have him lead the villagers onto like an escape pod, and then to send Kwafu with them,
Yeah.
to send them down to Earth and like basically try to it has this whole thing where Sean wants to swim the ocean,
Hmm.
and it becomes this big like like a sort of emotional thing where Yi has promised to show Shuan how to swim, but he
Yeah.
doesn't end up doing that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they get sent down to Earth, and then during the course, like, I think the plan was for E to meet up with them after he dealt with Aegon, right?
Uh, yeah, yeah. I'm not sure. I don't. It's not. I would have to play it again to know. I'm not sure if he actually thinks he's going to be able to do that. I think he's
Right.
lying,
But it's just
but
kind of like telling everyone, yeah, I'll meet
yeah,
up with you
that's
later. I'm gonna
ostensibly
go.
the plan. But I think he probably knows he's going to have to sacrifice himself.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we could have like fully predicted. Maybe you could have, but what happens at the end of the final boss fight if you do all that stuff to get the true ending is, instead of just dying, Aegon jumps up on the central roots that are like, the main hub, the main nexus in the station, and she infects the roots with, the serum that turns everything into mutants. And that in turn is going to infect all the Solarians in the system. And like she's cured the virus, but again, at what cost? So
Right.
E uses the rhizomatic bomb. You need to find one as an item. He like hooks it up to his bow and shoots it into the roots and basically like self-sacrifices and detonates the entire station.
Yeah.
And so like that, by doing that, it removes the block over the sun, and you can see on Earth, you can see ice melting and stuff like that as the sun returns. But there's this really emotional phone conversation where he says goodbye to Shan
Mhm.
Shan, which is really, really good. But this decision to do this also means, so it's sacrifice, it's also helping the humans, but it also means he's dooming the Solarians. There will never be a cure at this point.
Right.
And
Yeah,
there's
that's right.
been some conversation up until this point about, you have the science side of things that's going to research for a cure, and then you have the Taoist side of things that says maybe this is the way that things are supposed to end for the Solarians. And this is
Right.
E siding with that side of things.
Yeah, and there's a lot of really important stuff that's introduced with by Yi's sister Heng,
Yeah.
where she basically says that. So the reason that she had decided not to join them on the Eternal Cauldron project and leaving along with them on New Kunlun is that she basically, as a sort of devout Taoist, believes that the Chanho Huo virus is part of the Tao, right? And that they shouldn't
Yeah.
accept the fact that the Solarians are going to die out from this and return to the Earth. And of course, Yi thought that was crazy, right? Like, and so he left, like on that the world ship.
Yeah.
Uh, but it is sort of like what's happening in this true ending is that he's kind of realizing that she was right, right? And so
Hmm.
he finally kind of reunites himself with Hang in at least like spiritually, that kind of thing, and
Yeah.
their conflict is resolved by this final act of self-sacrifice that he makes.
Yeah, and it's this kind of, you can almost see this kind of moment at the end where E finally sees like the complete state of everything, and just, you can see like, we could continue this, but like, let's be real here. Maybe, maybe they were right. And obviously now that I think the choice has made it a little bit easier for him by the fact that Aegon infects the roots like she
Yeah,
does.
yeah, she sort of
So
forces his hand. Yeah,
yeah, but it's still, that is the choice, and that is the ideology that wins out. But also the legacy is passed on to the humans that are now on the surface, and Shan Shan and Kwafu is there too. Kwafu is this like genius inventor. He's there, but Shan Shan is armed with like so many things that he learned while on board, and you kind of
right.
get the feeling that humanity's in a good place to start with them. And it's it's interesting that the Wikipedia page for Nine Souls, if you, the first time Shan Shan's name is brought up, it links to this like great figure in Chinese history. So it's
Yeah,
like
like an emperor.
hinted at that he
Yeah,
grows up to do great things.
right. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting because you've been finding all these artifacts that have basically been teaching Xuan Xuan like arts and sciences, and so it's
Yeah,
sort of like by bringing that stuff to him and teaching him that he sort of passed the Solarians like cultural like traditions like onto the ape men.
right,
And so even though the Solarians are dying out, the ape men will continue like life back on Earth,
right.
along with all this like like arts and learning and stuff like that. So
Hmm.
it's pretty cool because you see, I mean, if you think about it, like what you was originally, thinking when Hang told him, I think this is natural. I think we should let it happen and we should return to the earth. But it does sound kind of crazy because it's like, okay, well, we're just like life is going to be like extinct now.
Hmm.
But he's learned that he can pass it on through like this other species, right? And it's sort of like he can let the one cycle die and another begin.
Yeah, I think there's a real theme of acceptance
Hmm.
throughout people who are making this choice. And it starts with Hang. Well, maybe it starts earlier with other characters like Lear, but
Yeah.
with Hang for sure, putting that on the forefront of just accepting that this is the natural state of things and we're not going to fight against this because this is how things go. And, we don't have to make the selfish choice to fight against this. We can go with the natural order of things, and then E at the end accepting that this is over and he has one choice, one chance to I'm not going to quote Eminem here, one chance to make things right, and kind of like we said, pass on a legacy to the humans. I think he has confidence that they're in good hands,
Yeah.
and they can
And
carry it on.
and in fact, like now that he's sort of spiritually aligned himself with Hang at the very end, you do kind of see them together, and you don't
Yeah,
know if it's really like, I mean, I don't, maybe they're in some kind of afterlife together, or maybe it's just a dream sequence, or maybe it's just kind of like a figurative, like symbolic
right,
type of thing. But you do finally see like Hang together with Yi, and that's kind of like the whole thing is like come full circle from their initial breaking apart and now
right.
coming back together. And
Yeah.
I think there's something that I really liked with their relationship that you learn in the game. So you've been seeing these kind of like codec conversations with Hang
Mm-hmm.
that I think I talked about this in the non-spoiler section, that go into these like flashback sequences where you see
Yeah.
scenes from their early life, but you don't really know what those are, right? Like it kind of seems like he's getting like a video call from Hang, but
Yeah.
it's not really, like if you stop and think, like is she like alive? Is she on like the is she in New Kunlun here and is like
Yeah.
calling him kind of like Rui does? I mean, it's not really explained until like almost the end of the game. And what you learn is that she had been sending, like after he left on New Kunlun, and like they sent the Eternal Cauldron project off into the stars. She'd been sending him transmissions from back on Penglai, right, which is like the world
Yeah.
that they lived in. Because he's broken from her, he didn't even listen to them. So it's
Yeah.
sort of like she was leaving him voicemails like over the years, just kind of
Mm-hmm.
telling him stuff. And he didn't listen to them until he starts on this journey, which is basically the events of the game. And now
Mm-hmm.
he's on this process of sort of bringing himself back into alignment with her. And he's finally listening to him, and it's like reminding him of all these things that happened like during their like childhoods, like back on Penglai.
Yeah.
I just think that's like such a cool thing that you learn that, okay, these aren't like flashbacks. They're not like talking with someone who's out there. This is reconciling him with his memories.
Yeah.
That's just so cool to me.
It is very cool. Yeah, I didn't pick up on that, but it all fits along this spiritual journey that E goes on, and it makes it so, like this is a game where like the true ending is the true ending, right?
Uh-huh.
It's the good ending. It's the ending where one cycle's allowed to end, but a journey is complete, stuff like that, and then a new life begins somewhere else. The other ending is very anticlimactic and weird, and like not
Yeah.
in a bad way. It just feels like a bad conclusion for everything that you've learned throughout this, because the bad ending is that E kills Agong, goes like takes control of the station, flies it back to Penglai, and then you get out there, it's covered by this, it looks like a fungus or something that has
Yeah,
covered the
they're
planet.
like the virus turns people into flowers after they die. So the
Yeah.
whole like landscape is just covered with these white flowers.
Yeah. And so you get back and you're like, oh, this is, everyone's dead here. And then it's almost like he's being willfully ignorant of the situation, and he's just gonna like continue the work. Like he
Yeah.
has the tunnel vision that Agong had has now been passed on to him. And
Uh-huh.
there's nothing left to save, really. Everyone except everyone who's still in stasis. But like, you think about it, like the planet's uninhabitable. The virus is here. Like, if you say you find a cure and you bring them out, the planet's like ruined. Like, what are you actually saving? But this is the bad ending. This is the ending where his spiritual journey is incomplete. He doesn't seem to really learn a lesson or anything like that. It's just prolonging the end.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, I think that's why they call it the true ending instead of like the good ending or the bad ending. Because, like, I mean, the true ending is there's a lot of bad things about it. I mean, pretty much
Sure.
all the characters die.
Yeah.
Like the Solarians are wiped out, right?
Yeah, they're extinct.
That's kind of
Yeah.
bad. In the normal ending, like you might find a cure. They might be able to reestablish the Solarian society. But the main thing is that it's like a stasis position, right? So like
Yeah.
this like flow between these two poles that we've been talking about, like thematically, you know, the transition cannot be completed, and they're left in this state of kind of stasis. So
Right. Yeah. So the spiritual journey is incomplete. E, it's really hard to like pinpoint or quantify if this is even real, but there's that scene where they're kind of sitting in like this pavilion on Penglai and in this ending, and you know, E's just kind of sitting there and he seems out of it, you know, like someone comes up to give him a report on something that's going on and he's just like, and he doesn't seem, he seems worse off than he was before.
yeah, his spirit has been kind of attenuated in some sense.
Yeah.
Like it's like he's not all there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the person who comes up to him, like the kind of like servant, like lieutenant, it's one of the ape men too, which I think is interesting because he's basically in this ending taking the ape men and like basically they become his like sidekicks in this world. Yeah.
Yep. So that is Nine Souls, and again, I really like all of this story stuff, and especially like I think the true ending of this is really, really beautiful, even though it doesn't end with the good ending that you think it's going to end with. It is a good ending in so many ways. So I really like this, and this has been another classic Tales from the Backlog long episode, but there's been for a Metroidvania surprising amount of stuff story wise to talk about.
Yeah,
and I'm glad we took the time to dig into it.
Yeah, there's so much. I mean, we didn't even really dig into the parallels between like Yi and Lier, and the way that his like whole journey like recapitulates stuff that happened in the history of the world. But I mean, we could be here forever if if we did that. Yeah.
There is a lot of stuff, but yeah, this has been a really fun episode. Good to have you on the show, and I appreciate you taking the time to break this one down with me.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. It's one of my favorite games of the year, and it's been really cool to be able to kind of dig into it on like a thematic level and stuff, and not just talk about how hard it is. So it's been a super fun conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as we said before, I think a lot of the conversation around Nine Souls will focus on how hard it is, and I mean, we spent our time talking about that too, for sure. But there is a lot of thematic stuff to dig into too, and I really love the cyclical nature of this story and how. There's a lot of stuff going on here, but it ends up tying together very, very neatly in like very understandable. With there's obviously some things that like I was like I didn't perfectly understand this or I didn't catch this, but all told, it is very neatly laid out and it ties together really well. It makes it easy to talk about.
Yeah, it's a complete story. It's not something where they're just hinting at various things like. Everything that it introduces, like you pretty much, if you like dig into it enough, you can understand it.
Yeah, you're going to get your answers for sure. So thank you again for taking the time. Thank you for joining me on the show. This has been awesome. For everyone listening all the way to the end, thank you. As always, if you've listened to the end of any of my episodes, you are my hero. And all that's left to say is to tune in next week for the next game to come out of the backlog.
Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
Immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds.
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun. Whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen,
And I am Matt, aka Stormageddon.
and on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there, so we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Jeff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming.
Welcome to Bits of Time, where we ask you the simple question, is this video game worth your time? And we're two brothers having a conversation about a game and why we loved it.
Or a difficult discussion about why I didn't or we didn't beat a game. So I hope you join us.
Because it gets pretty wacky sometimes with the questions we ask each other, and maybe a little heated every once in a while too. If you plan on sticking around, you'll be getting 2 episodes each month, the first and third Wednesday.
We also have a brand new debate-focused series, so if you want to be a part of it, join us.
Yeah, join us. Or, reach out, get in contact with us, and maybe you could be on the show with us and debating all kinds of things, granular or not. We'll see you then.